community and sector wants of its curriculum. It's in these proximal purposes, if you like, how one thing leads to another, that we really start to understand the emancipatory power of curriculum and the frequent failings of curriculum, especially for the disadvantaged, those with any learning needs, or any child that just feels marginalised in any way. They're the losers. So let me finish up then by saying where we are in the process, and hand over to you for questions. So we've got about 90 teachers, just over 90 teachers, working closely in 13 subject teams. And a driving principle that I've set for all subject groups is that the specificity that Lucy recommended achieves its power cumulatively. And of course, while curriculum is a narrative, it's a very complex narrative. It's not always a linear, tidy narrative. And there's lots of interchangeable bits within it, huge scope still for flexibility. And our job is to make sure that that scope for flexibility, for optionality, works together still for that coherence and sequencing. And like any good narrative in a film or a novel, it's actually a lot of interweaving and diagonal connection across the piece. So we're overseeing an interconnected whole, not a set of silos. And the various teams of subject teachers have been given operating guidance to focus on, if you like, those core essences to which I've just alluded, and how they build over time, whether it's the digital tech group thinking about the principle of algorithms or system architecture or whatever it is. And so far we're on time and we're on target. We're working to a very tight schedule, as you know, but in some ways it's quite a generous schedule, actually, as these models go. And I've worked in a number of international contexts, and actually this one we have been as generous as we possibly could be in terms of making time and space for teacher voice. We've got an allowance of many days for discussion so that all voices, teacher voices, can be aired and problems can be reasoned out together without rushing. And everything can be stress tested, not only against the international evidence, but against Northern Ireland teachers' practical professional knowledge of what is realistic and what is already effective in their classrooms. So in that sense, it's not about a complete pendulum swing. It's really about drawing on the strengths of existing practice, but examining that practice very systematically with the core principle of giving all children their entitlement and making sure nobody misses out. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much indeed, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you to both of you, and appreciate you had a lot to get through there, and probably more you'd have liked to cover in your opening remarks. So thank you for that. I'll maybe start by picking up sort of where you left off, Christine, around the sort of the timelines and maybe just an overview of where we're at on that. So the curriculum review itself, I think it was recommendation 21, recommended a staggered implementation and periodic review. And I think it was phrased as, I've got it noted as, that the ongoing review of the curriculum would follow naturally from a staggered implementation of the new curriculum framework, with 2 or 3 areas of learning introduced each year, giving schools time to undertake relevant professional development and create or adapt appropriate resources. We're looking at a timescale of this rolling out potentially 2028, 29. Do you feel, maybe for you, Lucy, and then maybe Christine, to speak to the process that's at play, do you feel the current timelines that are being operated to are reflective of that recommendation around a staggered implementation? Because, I mean, certainly what we would be hearing, I think, across the committee from teachers and school leaders in particular, is that they are concerned about the pace of change in the context of lots of other new initiatives that are coming from the department at the same time.
Yes, I do. To answer your question, I do think that recommendation has been taken on board with that projected 2028 start. I mean, and I do think it's worth saying as well that it won't be all of the subjects all at once in 2028, that it will be implemented over a 3-year time period. So in line with my recommendation, that will allow for time for different key stages and different subjects to start at different times, allowing for teachers to not be trying to get their head around everything, and all, especially for primary teachers, for them to be getting their head around all of these new this new content in these subjects all at once. Although, of course, the specific which subjects will start and that kind of thing is still very much under discussion. Of course, there's a few years to go yet. Christine, do you have anything you
Could I just ask, and it may be for you, Lucy, or maybe for Christine,
Yes.
on that, given, I mean, the phrase you used, Christine, was about knowledge structured as a narrative over time, and you were really at pains to emphasise this is the interconnectedness of this. You can't take this in isolated blocks or silos. It connects, and it connects over time through a child's journey. On that basis, I mean, how challenging is actually rolling out a staggered implementation of this? Because if it all connects, but it happens over a very, very long time, you could have kids at different stages of their journey who may never actually interact with all of the new curriculum for their journey. How do you address that challenge?
Shall I pick that up, Lucy?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much. Great question. Really important, and it's very much at the heart of what we're working on now in terms of advising the department on how it might do it. So first of all, everything that Lucy has said is exactly what is going to happen, and the phased rollout is, as you know, will begin in 2028, and I think even that has come as a relief to some teachers who imagined perhaps it might have been earlier. And then from 2028, it is phased over 3 years. And that phasing will be by subject and by key stage, with advice that will be bespoke to each key stage, because it is quite different, as you can imagine. You mentioned that it was pretty complex. It certainly is. And it's complex precisely because it is a narrative. So there is a point, there is a sense in which curriculum rollout is always extraordinarily difficult, because the optimal way to do it would be to take 14 years over it. And clearly we don't want to do that. So I think there's 2 stages to it. First of all, it's trying to get the best possible scenario across that 3 years of phasing to make sure that as many children as possible benefit from it as quickly as possible. But at the same time, teachers aren't overloaded, so they've got time to build subject knowledge, to make the most of the resourcing and the professional development that will be provided to support the curriculum. But another way, the only thing really I'd add structurally to what Lucy said in terms of what we're going to advise the department on, is that what we will need are what is commonly known as transition arrangements. We need to accept that in the short and medium term, not all children are going to benefit from all parts of the curriculum. It'll be some years before that child in year 8, year 9, for example, has benefited from the power of the whole of the primary curriculum. However, they can benefit from a very good part of it. So there'll be transition arrangements to make very clear how it can operate while it's still operating in that non-optimal phase, if you like.
Could I just ask one other question on that? Because I have one other thing I want to ask, and I am really conscious we are up against it with time. You mentioned there 14 years as the optimal, and look, I appreciate, I doubt anyone around the table here is advocating for 14 years, because we do want children to get to be getting a consistent and coherent experience through their school journey. But 14 years versus 3 years seems there seems a big disconnect between that. Would there be any possibility that we should be looking at a middle path through this, that is perhaps a little bit more realistic in terms of what would be closer to optimal and best practice? I would have a concern in that gap between 14 and 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's what I mean by transition arrangements. It's accepting, in a way, there is a middle path between the 3 years and 14 years, because I think the point I'm making is that that 3 years is simply, when do we make sure that every single part of the curriculum comes on stream? When is it going to start? When will the teachers be ready to teach it? When will the resourcing be ready for them to understand how to do it and how to practice it? When I say, that it's not optimal because it's not 14 years, the point is that the full benefit of the curriculum cannot be realised until, a period that is longer than 3 years. Because, of course, the time it will take for a child to have had the benefit of all of that primary experience will take a little bit of time. However, given that in some respects, because there has been a huge lack of specificity thus far, which has been really problematical, particularly for the disadvantaged child, particularly for the child with special educational needs, particularly for the child who's been lower attaining in any way at all. Because that is the case, there's no doubt that the improvements for those children will be exponential. You only have to have 1 year of better specified curriculum to see quite a transformation. So the benefits will be apparent really pretty quickly, even if the full benefits of being, the child who hits year 10, having had the whole experience, will inevitably take time. And I think also the place where you really want the benefit to be most heavily felt, which is in those early years, those foundation years that make difference, that will happen pretty quickly. And in terms of prioritising resourcing, it's that area that's going to be the most crucial, isn't it, for foundation and key stage 1, making sure that those children have the start that they need really early. And they are, 2-year and 3-year chunks, if you think about it, because foundation is 2 years. Key stage 1 is 2 years, key stage 2 is 3 years. So actually those children can actually benefit really quite quickly in terms of the impact.
Thank you for that, Christine. There is so much more I would like to follow up on that, because I think particularly you've raised early years, and that had been something I wanted to pick up. We'll see how time goes, may revisit it, but I'll bring the Deputy Chair in now, and if any other members then want to indicate, we'll bring them in from there. Okay.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to both of you. And Lucy, let me say at the outset that I read your book, Cleverlands, and I was very highly impressed. I thought it was written from a perspective of idealism mixed with pragmatism. And I mean, if I was starting off here with a clean sheet of paper to design an education system, I mean, I think your 5 principles would be the foundation stones of that. I certainly wouldn't disagree with any of that. I suppose it's all the more disappointing, therefore, that you came in to do a review of the curriculum, and you didn't include in that the impact that academic selection has, particularly on the primary school curriculum. I'm sure you're aware that in schools here, sometimes from primary 5 onwards, children are taught to the exam rather than to the curriculum. So what would you have to say to that?
Firstly, thank you for your kind words about my book. And yeah, my personal position on selection is in the public domain. If I was starting from scratch, as you say, if I was starting from scratch with an education system, I would introduce a comprehensive education system rather than a selective one. But as we discussed at my previous invitation to join the committee, I was looking at curriculum. I was invited to look specifically at curriculum and how curriculum might need to change to improve education. And I do think that starting from where we are in Northern Ireland, it's not a blank slate. I think that a curriculum reform is a really powerful way to change life chances for young people, more so almost than any other kind of reform. And I do think that the increased specificity of the curriculum that is being designed at the moment will guard against, not completely mitigate, I must admit, but will guard against some of the detrimental effects of that selection test on the skewing of the curriculum. At the moment, where there is very little that schools have to teach, very little that is statutory, there is lots of space for then the curriculum to be driven by that CEAG test. Whereas if you have a specified curriculum that's a broad curriculum that specifies what children need to learn across history, across geography, across science, it's going to be a bit stand on its own 2 feet a bit more as a curriculum, and to ensure that children get that entitlement.
But you do accept that even if there is a new curriculum, that it's going to be distorted by the fact that academic selection is here, and apparently it's here to stay for the foreseeable future, according to this minister.
Yes, I think it will still have an effect.
Okay. All right. Just also in your book, you spoke about the way children and young people had internalized the importance of education in Singapore and China, I think it was. And there is an issue of culture here, and I'm just wondering whether you picked up on it or not. And let me explain. When this state was established, it was established on the basis of a gerrymandered sectarian head count, which was aimed at giving unionism a permanent or perpetual majority here in the north. And The upshot of that was that if you weren't a unionist, you became a second-class citizen, and there was institutionalised sectarianism and discrimination in practically every walk of life, particularly in employment. And all the organs of the state were populated, particularly in the higher echelons, by people from the unionist community. And you will know also probably that the educational outcomes in Catholic schools far exceed the outcomes in particularly the controlled sector. And the reason for that, I would argue, is that there was a culture among Catholics in terms of the importance of education, and the way to escape discrimination and sectarianism was by becoming educated. And I know people of my generations, their parents hammered that into them. And I wonder if you have taken account of all of that, you know, when you have been reviewing the curriculum here.
I don't disagree with you in terms of the effects of that importance of education and that cultural impact on education and educational outcomes. I don't think that it affects, therefore, what should be in the curriculum. If anything, it means that in terms of making sure that society is equal, that there is a curriculum or a curriculum entitlement that all children are supported to reach, whether they are from a home environment in which they are being supported educationally by their parents, or parents who recognise the value of education, or whether the parents either don't or don't have the time to support their children at home. I mean, that's why you need in the Northern Ireland curriculum, in a system level curriculum, you need there to be that entitlement to make sure that it's not just the case of home life determining your future outcomes. But yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting perspective, and I'm sure that does make a difference in terms of educational outcomes.
And just finally, and I'll be short here, Chair, because I know the Chair's glaring at me here. You know, in your book also, you talked about ensuring that, you know, politicians don't cherry pick various issues. And my issue here is that I feel the issue of the curriculum is being cherry picked, and it's being organised in a way. There seem to be quite a large number of people like yourselves from the island beside us who are involved in constructing this curriculum, and the final say will go to the central task force and then presumably the minister. And there's just a fear there that as a result of that, the curriculum may actually be quite skewed in one political direction. How would you respond to that?
Just ask for a brief response on that, please.
Yeah, a brief response would be that we have. Oh, in fact, I've passed over to Christine on this one, because Christine is overseeing the history framework, which I think is probably the most relevant here to take that one.
Yes, can I just respond in very general terms, really, as an echo of what Lucy has said? I come to this actually from a perspective of a lot of experience of working in really quite diverse societies and cultures who've tried to address this. I found myself working in the context of the history curriculum, for example, in post-conflict societies such as Cyprus and Lebanon, where it's extremely difficult to agree on anything in a history curriculum. And it seems to me that in a curriculum in general, beyond history, the whole business of prioring inequalities, whether they are baked in socially, institutionally, however they're baked in, or whether they're economic facts, that is the point of a curriculum. The point of a curriculum is to try to bring equity into that situation. So in a way, that is the starting point for a curriculum. It's saying, you know, we cannot have a situation where a child who has a low starting point for whatever reasons, whether it's a reason that's discernible, that we can detect, a known injustice, or whether it's something that perhaps we haven't detected, we cannot have that situation. And this is why the emphasis on knowledge is so important. Because if you look at academic knowledge, the knowledge that comes from somewhere outside of school, that comes from communities of practice, from disciplines, from communities of experts, whether that's artists or scientists, that knowledge is for everybody. It escapes its social origins, however it was created. That knowledge of science, of history, of art is for everybody. And the curriculum there is designed to give power to everybody to enter into those conversations on an equal basis. That's its point. And really, that's my job in overseeing it, is to make sure that those fundamental structures of knowledge, that knowledge which, as Lucy alluded to earlier, is also provisional and revisable, and which everybody has a right to test. Everyone has a right to say, I think this historical claim that is being made is wrong, and this is my evidence for it. Or everyone has a right to comment as a member of the public on how scientific knowledge is shared or is used, say, in public institutions, or how public money is spent on the arts or whatever. For every citizen to be able to comment on that equally, they must have access to a wide range of knowledge. And your reference point is not a political position, and it's my job to be alert to it if it were. Your reference point is those disciplines themselves and how they arbitrate about what constitutes truth, and how children themselves not only get enough reference points within that discipline, they know enough, they have the substantive concepts, say, within science or with history, to join in the conversation, but they're also given the tools to question claims for themselves, to learn multiple interpretations.
Conclusion, Christina,
history.
if that's okay. Yeah, thank you. Apologies to have to cut you short. I know there's probably a lot of early material you want to get out there to do a bit of scene setting, and I do understand that, and I understand it's such a wide-ranging area. But if I could just ask to keep for everyone, members and witnesses, to keep really focused on succinct answers. But we obviously want full and good evidence. But just to help us get through the session. Indicated next was Kathy.
Thanks, Chair. Lucy, just as Pat has said, I've also read your book, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I very much respect a lot of what you're saying, because it's very informed. I think in the travels and the study that you've done, and just like Pat said, the 5 principles, couldn't disagree with any of them. But what concerns me is that the Minister's direction, I wonder, has the Minister read the book? Because his direction seems to run quite contrary to a lot of the things that you have said, in my view. And Pat did mention there about the reference to cherry picking of the evidence, and I just want to, I think it's important to lay the context out for this. What you mentioned was politicians, along with the rest of us, have been known to cherry pick evidence, to choose to mention only the data or the features of top performing systems that back up their pre-existing ideas, and ignore the evidence that throws doubt on their proposed reforms. Now, I think that would be quite stark for a lot of the principals and school leaders who have been in contact with us, who are very, very concerned, I have to say. Like, we've had principals contacting us at absolute breaking point with the breakneck speed that they feel that this is going at. Would you have anything to say or to comment on that? Do you feel that the Minister is cherry picking evidence?
Firstly, thank you for your kind words about my book once again. And no, I don't. Genuinely, I think the various aspects of the Transform Ed agenda are all ones that I support. I do think that there's something to address here, and I promise I'll be brief, Mr. Matheson. But there is this idea that a knowledge-rich curriculum somehow associated with right of centre or right-wing politics, and I would just say that actually, if anything, I would say it more aligns with a left-wing view of that, importance of equality and closing the disadvantage gap. And I think it's I'll stop there. But just briefly, I do agree with the direction of the reform, and I don't see that Mr. Given has done any cherry picking that I can identify.
So if we
Can I
look
quickly come in on that too, is that okay? Just very briefly to say, just to support entirely what Lucy has said, and to give reassurance, it is an excellent question, and I think it is absolutely right to ask that question. It's a question that I asked when I was invited to do this. If I had felt that there was any cherry picking of evidence or any political direction, I would not have accepted the role. I agree too, the knowledge agenda is very much an agenda that has been espoused by the left, as it happens. Not that it matters who espouses it, but it has, in its origins, it is very much a social justice agenda, which also conforms with, my own political persuasions. I would have been extremely uncomfortable if they'd gone in a political direction. For what it's worth, I'm a member of the Labour Party, not that that matters, but this is absolutely not a direction that is going in that is driven politically at all. And I think both Lucy and I felt very uncomfortable taking part in it. We reviewed the evidence, and our job is to comment without fear or favour.
I would have to disagree. The very fact that academic selection is not taken into consideration in this sort of, to me, contradicts that argument in terms of cherry picking, but that's my own view on it. I want to just, the Chair mentioned about the early years curriculum, and the review does recommend that an early years curriculum framework should be developed. It underpins our whole system, and we hear time and again around early intervention. Why has that not been a feature of the curriculum review then?
So my understanding is that that's kind of waiting in the wings, and so I've got a question for the department, but I think that they wanted to focus on one thing at a time, and so the focus initially has been the main curriculum framework, but that's something certainly that is still I believe the plans are still to take that forward, so it's certainly not been ignored. But there's as you can imagine, this is already there's a lot going on, so I think there's only so much that can be focused on and taken forward at any one time.
So I suppose again there from what I'm hearing from early years practitioners, is that there's a suspicion there that this is being rushed through, that this has been done in such a short space of time that there just isn't the time to do the early years curriculum at this stage. What would you say to people who are saying that?
Shall I come in there, Lucy? I would say it's the other way around. It's precisely because it's so important that it needs reflection. And I think the right decision was made. It was a decision made by the department, not by us, but to focus on the schooling years first, to get a sense of goals of what we're trying to achieve. And the department is certainly looking at a plan to do that 0 to 6 piece that Lucy recommended, and that will come in. It will come on stream like a slipstream as part of this, even though it's not the thing that's being focused on first. It's much too important to rush.
So, and again, Lucy, just to go back to your to your book again, to reference it, I know the importance that you place on those early years, and you reference the likes of Finland and their system there, and it just seems to me quite obscure that a minister would have instructed you to review the curriculum without considering the impact of early years, and how important that 0 to 6 actually is.
Oh, it is, and I wasn't asked to not look at that, and I did take that into consideration, and I did, as you know, write about it and make recommendations on it in my review. So absolutely, that's fundamentally important. And the department accepted my recommendations in relation to early years. So I think it's just a case of not everything can happen all at once.
It's just not important enough to do it at this stage.
I suggest we probably want to pick that up as a follow-up with the department on the back of this session, as that's certainly issues that I'd wanted to raise. Just time was against me, so I think that is one to pick up. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the evidence. I'm going to maybe pick up where Kathy left off slightly. Just the last time you were here, Lucy, actually we discussed school readiness, and you described it as a ticking time bomb. So in that context, it does feel like the early intervention is where we're going to have the greatest impacts, and the sequencing that we're discussing here, it feels like early years makes sense to be the starting point for this, and will have the most impact ultimately in terms of outcomes for young people. Can you just maybe expand a bit more on just really the logic of not pursuing that at this stage?
So I think that'll be a question for the department, in that it wasn't up to Christine or I what to focus on first and what to focus on next.
Would you have a
But I completely agree with you in terms of the importance of those early interventions. I also don't see it as being at odds with having started by designing the curriculum, because this is going to be a bigger job in terms of all of those years of schooling, in terms of designing a specific curriculum. And there is no reason why early years interventions can't be designed and put into practice in the years between now and the actual implementation of this curriculum. So I don't see it as being that ship has sailed, or that's a missed opportunity, or certainly that this necessarily will happen before. But as I say, it's that's not really up to myself and Christine.
Asima, you want to come in there? Sorry.
Yes, just very, very briefly. There is a logic to it. Is as Lucy says, for the department, and I think I would advise writing to the department specifically about that to pursue that question. But there is a logic to focusing on the schooling part of it straight away, and that is, we also know from the international evidence that two things in particular make a colossal difference to later outcomes. One is proper teaching of early reading and writing, and making sure that that piece of using phonics, for example, appropriately and thoroughly, to make sure that no children miss out in any of those building blocks. And secondly, that early number work, that fluency and automaticity, those are really, really vital pieces. And so much of later inequity comes down to the fact that children missed out those building blocks early, and then they weren't consolidated properly. And so, there is a logic to thinking about the schooling piece early, although certainly you want to think about what comes earlier, because what you're thinking about is, how do we get children ready for that? What is it we're getting them ready for? So I think it is entirely sensible to say, right, what are our goals for the youngest children in terms of schooling?
Okay. Appreciate that. I wanted to pick up on educational disadvantage. We're going to actually hear, I think, next week from a really good piece of research from Stranmillis that looked at really high-performing post-primary schools in disadvantaged areas in Northern Ireland. And these are kind of success stories right now in Northern Ireland. Now, they didn't mention things like knowledge-rich curriculum. The kind of stuff that they focused on was allowing the curriculum to be dynamic and responsive, and actually being allowed to tailor to the needs of the individual pupils. They kind of rejected anything that might look like a one-size-fits-all. So I just want to understand from the changes that are coming through here, will that flexibility still be there for those schools to be able to adapt to the kids to ensure they have the support that they need?
Yes, absolutely. One of Lucy's principles was about flexibility, and flexibility was at the heart of one of Lucy's recommendations around inclusion, which the government accepted. And trying to come up with a statutory curriculum is about working out what are the absolute essentials, so that each key stage can take assurance from the previous key stage. Each new teacher can take assurance from what has been learned earlier and build on it cumulatively, and not allow certain children to miss out. Those are the most crucial things that make a difference, especially around disadvantaged children, especially around such things as the vocabulary gap. But a statutory framework really only ever does actually a crucial piece, but a very small piece of the overall curriculum work that an education sector as a whole does. It simply specifies the parameters, it specifies the essentials, it identifies core essences. It's down to resource providers, whether that's textbook writers or schools, teachers producing materials, groups of schools collaborating, and teachers themselves in particular, to actually design the detail of what they do, and a wide range of optionality is possible within that. So really our job is to find that sweet spot, that we have enough of an entitlement to make sure that we deal with the inequity that comes from disadvantaged starting points by making sure everyone has a common vocabulary. And we know that that makes the biggest difference for literacy. But at the same time, to make sure that there is enough space for those choices and for that flexibility. And indeed, that's really important too, just for teacher satisfaction. And my background is as a teacher and as a teacher trainer. And unless teachers have that sense of agency and collective agency, then again, they're not motivated to be part of the profession. So it's a critical part of it. And it's about finding that sweet spot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Danny, you were next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Can I start off by asking, see the curriculum reform under Michael Gove in England, how closely aligned or have you taken this review?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question, and I'm delighted to answer it. You may know that both Lucy and I are critics of many aspects of the Govian reforms. So there's no question of this, trying to be some sort of a cut and paste of that. And whilst, Michael Gove and the reforms in England did espouse an emphasis on knowledge, I would say there's a very significant distance, really, between what we're doing and what was done there.
Christine, did they also take away coursework and modules?
Okay, well, that's not part of our review, because that's part of qualifications and assessment.
But is that what they done, though? Your
In
critic.
terms of GCSE, yes, there was a removal of coursework, yes, but that's really not part of our remit or what we're going to comment on.
This goes back to the cherry picking side of it.
Yeah.
So you've just said you're a critic of them, but the change they done has resulted in that, has resulted in coursework being taken away, putting more pressure on high stakes exams. This is all part of Transform 8. So all coming together, puts more stress on young people. You said earlier on about inclusion, about listening to our young people. They're all saying that this is the wrong approach. This knowledge rich will reduce creativity. It puts more emphasis on academic type exams or subjects. We're moving away from your art, design and music. That's exactly what Gove did.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to just make a couple of distinctions here. I mean, the first thing is we are not overseeing the issue of qualifications. So really that isn't part of our remit, and that's a separate issue. I was talking more broadly about, say, the national curriculum that comes before that comes before the examination years.
So see in England, for example, they would be very content heavy now with their GCSEs, and then everything's having to be squeezed before key stage 3, with many schools having to use year 9 to cover overburdened specifications. That would fall into the curriculum stuff, wouldn't it?
Yes, no, and I would agree with that critique of England, and let me just explain how that is germane to the process here. I said at the start that, we're not unqualified admirers of the reforms that have been produced in England. In fact, we've criticised many aspects of them, and you're right that all the parts do connect. So I've been very critical, for example, of some of the teacher training reforms in England. Now, I just need to row back on a couple of things you said there, because it's very important. Knowledge rich is often widely misunderstood, and I can see why it might be those misunderstandings can be worsened by the way in which some of the Gove reforms were introduced and articulated. There are a number of problems with the way in which the statutory frameworks were produced in England. I don't think that they introduced really what I would call a knowledge-rich curriculum. A knowledge-rich curriculum is not the same as an information-rich curriculum. An information-rich curriculum is content-heavy, it's stuffed with facts, it's overwhelming. And also it makes the mistake, and I would say the Govian reforms made this mistake, of just imagining that you can be knowledge-rich by pushing a lot of content into GCSE. Really, if you get early specificity, much lower down in the curriculum, specificity where it's really needed, with those basics with much younger children, with those basics with broad knowledge too that enriches the curriculum, broad knowledge that goes into those subjects beyond English, maths, with a really strong emphasis on the humanities, on science, on the arts, on such things as digital technology. If you get that tremendous breadth, which is absolutely vital for literacy later on, you do much more in terms of tackling the disadvantage gap around literacy.
But
where things go wrong, and can I just say,
because Christine, the problem of all of that is that when you come to that stage of GCSE, the pressures are being put on the high stakes because coursework is being removed. That they move on to A levels. I know you want to say it's qualifications, but it's all connected. Every single part of it. So Michael Gove did do knowledge rich. You're saying there's a different type of knowledge rich this is going to be, but if you're taking principles from that remove those aspects that help young people, then it's going to fail flat in its face.
No, not at all. And I think what's happening actually is that I think, with respect, understandably, you're conflating knowledge rich with an issue of coursework or no coursework, which is an entirely different issue, which I don't want to comment on here. What really does matter, and I think is at the heart of your very good question, is the fact that if you are not specific enough lower down, you can easily imagine, a jurisdiction can easily imagine, that the way in which to be knowledge rich is to stuff your qualifications with information. If you're specific lower down, then it renders the need to stuff things with information redundant higher up. Really, you want your lower curriculum to do the job of becoming, if you like, a strong tree trunk so children can inhabit any branch. That's the first point. So you shouldn't be stuffing your GCSE with content. You shouldn't need to, because the children have gained that breadth and that security that combats disadvantage, that transforms literacy in particular for the disadvantaged earlier on.
So Christine,
Secondly,
so you would
keep the
support...
curriculum really broad. And I think another concern, quite apart from GCSE, is that the danger of some of the Govian reforms is that it appeared to play down the arts. And the arts are absolutely crucial. They're crucial for human thriving in obvious ways, but they're also crucial more broadly for such things as literacy. They're fundamental, and getting those right, properly privileged, properly supported in the primary phase and at Key Stage 3 is right at the heart of this and right at the heart of tackling disadvantage.
Final comment, Danny.
But it won't tackle disadvantage when the way the high stakes exams are going to be. So that's right at the end of this. That's what the curriculum will bring you to taking that exam. There's no coursework. It's going to be high stakes. So what's the point?
I think there's maybe. Okay. I think I'm going to leave it at an agree to disagree point there. I think with that has been rehearsed back and forward. John, you were next.
Thank you. Really interesting, Christine and Lucy. I'll not go back to the start of the Troubles or formation of the state because we've got very little time. The first question is, what evidence shows the outcome and progression expectations of a knowledge-rich curriculum are appropriate with children with special education needs who are educated in mainstream schools and children from disadvantaged backgrounds?
Yeah, there's a wide range of evidence which shows that. I'm not going to try and give you chapter and verse here, but it's very clear that those basics. It's very difficult to generalise about special educational needs because obviously it ranges across a huge range of issues. But those absolute basics that give you fluency, that free up the space in your working memory, that prevent cognitive overload, that give you automaticity so that you can think freely. Those kinds of approaches, the kind of content that secures that, helps children with special educational needs to be able to access a broader curriculum. So, if you look at, I'll just give you a couple of references so that you can sort of, if you want to explore it in more detail. But the accessible references, if you look at, say, the work of Peps McRae, or look at any of the blogs recently by Carl Hendrick, who pulls it all together, who's working with us on the pedagogical principles, it's very clear that, what is good for special educational needs children is good for all. So if you're giving children these absolute basics, you're building steadily to make sure that they get secure in those foundational building blocks around phonics, for example, those foundational building blocks around number, then you're freeing up their concentration abilities. You're building their confidence to be secure in making sense of structures and relationships, giving them opportunity to enter into reasoning, problem solving and creativity in a structured way.
Just conscious of my time.
You're doing something transformational.
It's very tight, so I'll just move on to the next one, because I think this is one of the biggest curriculum changes in, 25 years? Would it be?
Yes.
And I have 5 minutes to ask you questions about it, which sums up one of the problems we've got here in the Assembly. Look, in terms of Northern Ireland already performs strongly in literacy and numeracy, and Ms. Crane, your review highlights some of the strengths of our curriculum. What is the rationale then for moving to a knowledge-rich curriculum at this time?
So there are strengths of this curriculum, and certainly there are strengths in this system in terms of the quality of teachers, for example. But I wouldn't say that the curriculum in itself is one of the strengths of the system at the moment. In terms of those overall outcomes, it depends on what data you look at. So although if you look at GCSE data, often Northern Ireland is held up as being better because it gets more A to C grades than other home nations. However, they are different exams. They're not directly comparable. And then if you look at the PISA data in reading, maths and science, it tells a different story, where actually Northern Ireland is not performing particularly strongly, has kind of stagnated over time, is performing worse than England and worse than the Republic of Ireland. So there is, from a data perspective, I think that the GCSEs have given a certain impression that perhaps isn't supported by all of the data, and there is so much scope for improvement and further support for the system and all of the fantastic educators and young people who work and study within it through this curriculum reform.
Just final question, and thank you for the answer. I'm not opposed to the knowledge-rich curriculum per se. I ask questions to try and get close down some concerns I have. In terms of the proposed direction, it goes further than your review in a number of ways. You make a recommendation, and the direction actually goes further than that. Have you any view on some of the parts that go further than your recommendations?
I think within the scope of curriculum, what we're doing is very much aligned with my recommendations, and it's the curriculum that we are overseeing the design of is being designed to support the principles that I recommended. So I don't think, I mean, unless you're talking about the broader system level reform, but then of course, as rehearsed earlier, I wasn't commissioned with reviewing the whole education system, simply the curriculum. But in that respect, I don't think that what we're doing does go further than.
What about teaching language in primary school? Your recommendation not much lighter than actually what's been recommended, what's been implemented?
I think what's going forwards with that is I mean, it's still to be decided in that respect. And I suggested that it was a consideration, and there was a time built in for that to be trialed as something that was optional. So I don't think that has gone further than I was recommending.
Thanks for your answers.
Thank you. Peter, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I've only got one question. Just for transparency, I think we have to say whether we've read your book or not, Lucy. I'm afraid I haven't. I'm not sure that's going to set us off on the wrong foot.
You are forgiven.
But I do like your glass that you're drinking of. I'm pretty sure my daughter has one exactly the same, actually. So there you go. I'm going to talk about left and right as well, although thankfully not in politics. It's quite refreshing. But in terms of dominance, left and right brain dominance, and predisposition of children towards left and right brain. So in your recommendation 6, you talk about pedagogical principles, and actually it's quite an interesting few lines in there. I suppose my question really is, in terms of the previous curriculum, do you think it favoured left and right brain kids? And with the changes that are being brought in, does it change the answer to the first question?
So I wouldn't, as you know, in my review, I didn't refer to research on left and right brain kids, and I suppose I would, if by that what you mean is children who find the linguistic reasoning abilities more easy versus children who might find the more spatial types of approach more easy, I would say that actually the point of education is not to lean into and further strengthen what we already tend towards. I think it's to help children to access other sides of potential reasoning and ways of thinking and ways of doing and being that they might not be naturally predisposed to. And so I would, I think all children should have access to a wide range of subjects which will develop different, further develop different kinds of cognitive capabilities. So I would always kind of caution against the kind of curriculum where you identify, well, this child enjoys or is good at this thing, so let's do more of that and less of other things. So I think, if anything, that puts that child further at a disadvantage, because actually all of them should have a basis in all things. And actually what the psychological research suggests is that there's a huge amount of neuroplasticity, and actually we're all capable of remarkable things with the right input and the right training. So I think actually trying to balance that out is the best approach.
Christine looks like she's about to say something.
Well, very, very quickly. Just
okay, go ahead.
I mean, I don't think we have scientific evidence really to show that individuals are left-brained or right-brained, or dominant in one hemisphere. What we do have evidence is that people use both hemispheres equally. And while there are some specific brain functions that are kind of lateralized, if you like, some language typically in the left, as Lucy alluded to, the two sides actually work together. And so, as Lucy said, the curriculum, if it's about to bring about equity, is about dealing with deficit. It's about the fact that, even if somebody did have that tendency, then all the more reason to make sure that they can use all their potential and that these things are working optimally. And we also know that the thing that makes the biggest difference, particularly around creativity, is the range of reference points we have and the frameworks that we have, which is quite a powerful example of how the two sides work together.
Okay, I probably disagree. I would go so far as to say that you use the word plasticity in terms of an ability to swap or use maybe both sides of the brain to a certain degree, and I probably accept that. I probably wouldn't be in the way of thinking that there isn't enough research to suggest that some children are more left brain and learn certain ways, and more children are more right-brained and learn in other ways. And I suppose, and it's just a general point, whatever the curriculum, I think it needs to be a curriculum that actually allows children who have predispositions in one or other the ability to learn, because it's for all children. I'm not saying that I'm not particularly making the point that the last curriculum was predisposed in one way or this one is, but I'm just saying that whatever our curriculum is, it must allow the capacity to allow children to learn who I believe are predisposed to either left brain or right brain thinking. But I'll just leave that there. That's more of a statement than a question. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. And the last indication I think I have, unless David's coming in, is Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to the panel for being here. I'm just really intrigued about, we know the North has some of the lowest level of ours in our curriculum focused on languages. And even comparing to the South, we really don't, our young people, I feel, are really being left behind when it comes to languages. I believe over the past 10 years, French in particular has dropped over 40%. Can you just talk us through maybe some of the changes we can anticipate when it comes to modern languages?
Yes, of course. Yes. It's really concerning, isn't it? And we've looked very, very closely at that data, and also some of that that disparity across children's performance in languages correlates too with aspects such as disadvantage, which is even more concerning. There's no reason why the overwhelming majority of children shouldn't gain the joy and the pleasure, as well as all the access that it gives them to many aspects of social functioning of language. And so we've made it a major priority. The department, as you know, is still looking at the question in the longer term about whether it should be compulsory in primary. So they have set the direction around that. But we are building nonetheless, in order to test the waters there, an optional language awareness course for primary that schools can adopt, which we hope will be attractive and which we hope will begin to establish proof of concept around the value of doing preparatory work in primary. But there we're simply following that direction that the department has given us. But in terms of post-primary, we're building a very systematic program. We've got an excellent group of really experienced modern languages teachers, and it is going to be, as is necessary with modern languages, if you're going to really learn those constructions and get secure in them, it is going to be highly specific and very, very systematic. And the purpose of that, just to loop back to another important question earlier about GCSE, the purpose to that is to bring about that equality of access to GCSE. It isn't acceptable, is it, if children are hitting year 11 and they feel that they, can't take a GCSE examination because they're not good enough. And the answer lies in getting that right lower down in years 8, 9 and 10. So we've got a very, very thorough approach to that. And it's one where children become secure in construction and gain fluency earlier on. So it's a huge commitment and a determination, and very much a personal determination of mine, that deals with the inequality of access there.
That's brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Just moving on then, an engagement that we've had as MLAs and as an education committee with school leaders when it comes to talking about curriculum review and changes, they felt in many ways it's very fast paced. And what they want to see is a phased and sequenced implementation aligned with teacher readiness and training availability. Would you have anything further to comment on this, or perhaps detail what training you think might be necessary for our school leaders to facilitate these curriculum changes?
Really good question. And again, I think it's helpful to loop back to, we're dealing with, to the questions earlier around phasing, and you're dealing with trying to handle the tension, aren't you, between not doing it too quickly and causing overburdening, but equally not doing it so slowly that as many children as possible don't benefit from as soon as possible. So it is part of the remit of the Task Force Advisory Committee to make suggestions about how resourcing might be done, how professional development might be done, and also to develop a set of pedagogical principles that could perhaps be used too in supporting initial teacher education, which is another part, not part of our remit, but which we're very much connected to. And our view is really that resourcing needs to support schools. I'll just give you an outline picture at the moment of the essence of our recommendations. But resourcing needs to support schools in multiple ways. It needs to provide exemplars so schools can see what it means. It's very tricky, isn't it, with a high-level statutory framework, which is necessarily lean and stark in its expression, mustn't be overwhelming, to actually translate that into a rich classroom experience. And so it's extremely important that you not only have pedagogical principles which elaborate that, but you have some sample resourcing which says this is what it looks like in year 4 and year 5, this is what it looks like in year 9. So there's an exemplification function of resourcing. Secondly, I think over time, the department needs to develop some complete curriculum programs. So schools, if they want to, can adopt, some full programs, really reduce workload there. But thirdly, and most importantly, curriculum development and teacher development must be properly aligned in a well-functioning educational assessment system. And they need to serve each other. You don't develop teachers if they're not getting a chance to think about and exercise some collective agency in curriculum. And you don't get a good curriculum if you're not involving teachers. The two have to come together. So one starting point for that is these subject groups that have been working on the curricular frameworks, I think are the beginnings, they're the genesis, they're the little acorns, if you like, that will develop into working subject communities that can support resourcing, support professional development. And our recommendations will be about making sure that professional development and resourcing are linked, that come together. Because a curriculum, no matter how good we make it, must not ossify. It can't become fixed. It can't even wait till the next curriculum review. It needs to be enlivened. It needs to be constantly renewed at the level of curricular outworking. And that requires active, lively, voiced communities of teachers who are specialists in those subjects, who are saying, this is how we can make it work. So, our core advice at the level of principal to the department is you've got to keep teacher development and curriculum development linked, and you've got to invest in these communities of the best subject teachers to drive it forwards.
Thank you, Christine.
That's really helpful. Can I, Chair, do I have time just for one quick question?
It wouldn't be time for a question. We're way over time. But if a final comment, if you want to close it off, that's fine.
Yeah, just to note, thank you for answering my questions, and an engagement I've had with teachers and with young people, they've really talked about the value of learning for life and work, and they really want to see reform around that module to be as effective as possible when teaching young people about finances, healthy relationships, bereavement, etc. So just to note that, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Karen.
Absolutely noted.
Thank you.
David, you wanted to come in quickly?
Thanks very much, Chair. Just have two questions. Probably you've dealt comprehensively with some of the stuff that I may have asked in terms of your engagement with colleagues across the way, and the idea that this is an ideological intervention. I think that's been pretty dismissed, the sort of go straw man that's often used, or bogeyman as it may be, for colleagues across the way. What I would want to ask is on learning for life and work, reading your recommendations around that, which I think is interesting. Maybe you can speak to that. I guess concern over some of the other work that the committee's been doing for me is that there are many issues that are have great merit in terms of what we want to teach children, how we want to ready children for their future lives. But there's a lot of them, and learning for life and work is not something that has a lot of time devoted to it relative to your mainstream subjects. How do we make sure that subject is quality over quantity and doesn't become too crowded and a dumping ground for any particular trend at the time that people think that our kids should be learning? It may have some merit, but it can't all be done through schools.
Great question. I'm going to pass to Lucy, who's currently overseeing that aspect of the curriculum.
Yeah, and it definitely it's a live issue, and something definitely that I picked up in my review. I think partly it's about being clear about what is statutory and making sure that we identify in a lean way, what are the core issues or ideas that we want children to study as part of the school curriculum, making sure that that isn't overcrowded. But also, I think within the subject, and we're replacing LLW with a subject that will be similar content, but will be more have more progression between primary and secondary. So the working title at the moment is PSCC's Personal, Social, Careers and Civic, or Civic and Careers Education. Partly it's about making clear in there that while there will be various issues that are stated, there will be flexibility. I think more so also almost than any other subject, it's really important that there's flexibility in there in terms of the level of depth to which each point needs to be addressed. Now, each of the content items will be statutory that's within it, but it might be that actually a school, if they haven't got an issue with a particular thing or something not relevant in their community, they might just spend one lesson on it. Whereas if actually they find that the school at the moment has a big drugs problem, for example, they might choose to go into great depth in that issue. So there is a level of flexibility as to whether you just cover something briefly or you cover it in greater depth. And what we will make clear as well is that there is what's in statutory content is the only thing that is statutory. And of course, there will be providers, including SIA, that will produce resources of high quality, but potentially great volume, and that schools are not obliged to do those, that it is up to the school's discretion as to the depth at which they go in that in various different topics.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully that answers the question.
No, I appreciate that. Moving on to my other question, then it was around some of the digital elements that you touched on within your review. I really like the suggestion about schools linking up with IT companies and gaining the benefit of our sort of burgeoning cyber security and IT sector here in Northern Ireland. I know, talking about entertainment and so on, some of the working class primary schools in my own constituency are really keen to make sure that those kids who are maybe not growing up with parents working in those fields and so on or have those options put in front of them. And I think that goes along as well with how you've talked about making sure that children at a young age are not closing doors, but actually understanding the choices they're making and where they can lead. How do you think we do that at a younger age? And what more can be done in that regard?
I mean, I think what will really help about the curriculum that's in development at the moment is that there will be a subject and a framework specifically for digital technology, which sets out the specific content in terms of knowledge and skills that young people are entitled to. And so all children will get that entitlement, rather than at the moment where it was quite high level. It wasn't an area in itself. It was a cross-curricular skill, and so that led to very, very variable practice. And obviously, a lot of that is also dependent on individual teachers' knowledge too. Whereas when we have a clear framework setting out this is what young children need to know and be able to do, and older children, we can also then organise professional development around that for teachers, so that teachers are clear about what it is that they need to know and be able to do, so that they can ensure that their students can do the same.
Yeah, no, I think it's key that we get that consistency, and it also then deals further up the chain, I think, in terms of trying to change that culture where university has always seemed to be the gold standard. If you're educating your children about what choices they might wish to make and what pathways are available to them, then the earlier you can do that, the more informed their choices are at a later stage. So no, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David, and thank you for your time. Huge amount of ground covered in just over an hour, so really do appreciate your time. I wouldn't rule out the committee potentially wanted to hear from you again as this process evolves. Lucy, you may feel there's no escape from this when you took on the review, but we'll see how it goes. But we do thank you for your time, and we'll follow up on some of the discussion points there from here.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
me. Thank you.
Okay, members, so the only item of specific follow-up that I had noted, and happy if the clerk has anything else or any other members, was around the issue of a bespoke early years framework in the curriculum development, and in terms of what stage the work is at in terms of developing that, and the question then that followed on from that around the sequencing of this and to what extent it does make sense to start with school age reforms rather than at the early year stage if we are looking at those sort of sequential building blocks and school readiness. So I would certainly be happy to propose we write to the Minister to seek some clarity on those points, unless there was anything else or I've missed anything. No. Great. Okay.
So I also the material that the committee heard at its own curriculum review event and the write-ups of the tables were in members' packs today. So we could maybe provide those to the department and the task force.
I would be happy to endorse that if members are agreed. I had particularly wanted to pick up on the whole issue of education for sustainable development and the concerns that were flagged that is potentially dropping off the radar. So if members again are content to sort of see where that sort of environmental education would sit, I would be keen to pursue that as well. Are we all agreed? Okay.
See, at some point, will we be doing like any research papers, like a raised paper on like the comparables of the Transform Ed to the likes of the reform that happened with Gove in England? Because you're seeing that they're doing another review, that all the criticisms there, what it was meant to do, we're hearing the same thing. It will reduce stress, high stake things. It's done the whole opposite.
Is this around qualifications or curriculum?
It's all of it, because
the whole Transform Ed.
Because you can't just like, if you listen to that there, it's like, well, we don't really support Gove, but when you look at Transform Ed holistically, it has all the same trademarks of it. So it's alright saying we'll change this wee part, but this wee part, do you know what I mean? So can we do a compare?
Yeah, and Deputy Chair and then David.
And I understand our witnesses saying, well, that wasn't part of our remit, or we're just looking at curriculum. The difficulty is we need to look at everything, and everything is connected in a way. Even if you look at the proposed legislation for a managing authority for the controlled sector, all of that is connected to what's going on in the overall education system. So,
without a doubt, Transform Ed is being set out as a sort of interconnected programme of reform. It's not standalone items. We'll just pick up on an action with David first.
I don't agree with Danny's proposal. I have to say, me and Danny will not agree in terms of the qualifications and assessment side of things, but I don't really understand why we would undertake a comparative exercise between these reforms and the Gove reforms relative to any other education system. I mean, look at the proposals and the system that's being proposed and put forward, and critique it by all means, and we'll all have different views on that. But I mean, it seems to me just a nonsense to try and continually project Michael Gove onto people who sat here and told us. One said they're a member of the Labour Party, one has written a book which is greatly admired on this side, which is clearly not in line with Michael Gove's sort of thinking around this, but there is still this attempt to just continually mention Michael Gove, in my opinion, from a political direction. By all means, have a critique of what the Minister has put forward, and we'll have our view, and all others and other parties will have theirs. But why it has to be continually compared to the Gove reforms is just beyond me.
So I can go back on it. The reason,
I mean, very briefly, Danny, as we do have a big agenda here.
Serious reform and taking away, say, coursework, the AS. That is all part of what Gove done. It's now being undone or being looked at to be undone. We're about to make changes that has happened in England. Now they're going, oh, that's got worse. We need to do other things. So I think we should be flagging that as a holistic approach.
Can I check with the clerk in terms of Ray's engagement on this issue? There had been Ray's work done around Transform Ed, or there had been research commissioned. Is that?
I'd have to check back with them actually. I know they're prioritising the SEN regs.
Because we have legislation. I mean, and I was going to flag
that. We don't have massive capacity, to be honest. But I will check with them.
If I could suggest that as an action, because I recall there was a request made for some research on Transform Ed to help inform committees thinking on it. I am also conscious that there's a lot of legislative material coming through, and those SEN regs in particular are dense and complex, so we do want to ensure Rays have the time to brief us appropriately on that. So if the clerk could bring that back to next week, that would be great. Okay, that takes us on to item 7 then. It's an oral briefing from Department of Education officials on restrictive practices. We have a clerk's briefing note, page 397, and a briefing paper from the department, which is at page 12 of tabled papers. So just while witnesses are getting seated, joining us today we have Claire McClellan, Director of Raising Aspirations and Supporting Learning in the department, Michael Leonard, Head of Additional Educational Needs Team in the department, and Judith Logan from the Additional Needs Team in the Department of Education. So you're very welcome at committee today. Just for members' reference, officials had asked if there was any latitude for a slightly longer presentation today. So if you have specific material you feel is very important to get on the record for members, then we can just afford a few extra minutes for that. But I would ask everyone just to be mindful of time. And again, to be clear, that's not an interest of curtailing scrutiny. It is just ensuring that witnesses are not kept for inordinate amounts of time, and then that we can get through the business on the agenda. So at this stage, I'll hand over to Claire first. Would that be for starters? And we will go from there. So thank you.
Chair, thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee on the department's work to finalise guidance on the issue of restraint and seclusion in educational settings. Committee members will be aware that this is a complex matter which has become an area of significant public interest in recent years, with a number of cases brought forward by parents and carers of children with lived experience of restraint and seclusion. At the outset, I want to acknowledge those parents who have shared their views with the department and put on record my thanks for sharing what I know have been particularly difficult experiences. This is a highly sensitive and contentious area marked by strongly held and often divergent views, significant public discourse and several stakeholder withdrawals from the department's Task and Finish group, a group established by the Minister to progress redrafting of the guidance following the 2023 public consultation. There is a clear need to provide guidance on the use of restraint and seclusion in education settings that places the interests of children and young people at its heart, and that provides schools with the clarity and support that they require. Officials have been working to achieve this aim, and I must stress that we have always sought to engage with stakeholders throughout this process in an open, transparent and collaborative manner. A public consultation on draft guidance took place in 2023, and following that consultation, extensive further work has taken place to redraft the guidance in response to the issues raised through that consultation and further engagement with stakeholders. Following this engagement and refinement, a further draft of the guidance has now been developed, and the department will be moving forward with a further public consultation. My aim today is to set out some of the facts about the department's work to date, correct some misconceptions, and to give the committee an accurate picture of where we are, what lies ahead, and most importantly, to outline how the guidance will improve protections for some of our most vulnerable children. I would like to begin by addressing two fundamental misunderstandings. Firstly, the narrative around Article 4.1c, and secondly, the suggestion the department has not been collaborative or transparent during the development of the guidance. There's a growing narrative that Article 4.1c of the 1998 Education Order permits harmful, outdated or abusive practices in schools. That narrative is wrong and is not supported by the law, by practice or by the experience of our schools. It is important to acknowledge that in 2022 the department did publish a report following a review of the use of restraint and seclusions in educational settings, which recommended repeal of Article 4.1c. That recommendation was accepted by the then Minister. The position has evolved since then. Extensive further engagement, updated legal advice and a clearer understanding of school practice shows that the rationale for repeal outlined in 2022 requires further consideration. There are three key reasons. Firstly, since 2022, through sustained engagement with teachers, classroom assistants, school leaders and special school practitioners, Article 4.1c has not been identified as a driver of poor practice. The clear message is that schools need improved guidance, training and clarity. Secondly, the department is not aware of any evidence that Article 4.1c is being used to legitimise harmful, outdated or abusive practice. Most importantly, Article 4.1c does not permit such practice. It is part of a legislative framework which within schools safely operate. Thirdly, updated legal advice confirms that Article 4.1c does not permit corporal punishment. It does not permit punitive or retaliatory force. What Article 4.1c does do is allow staff in defined circumstances to use reasonable, proportionate force for behaviour management, including when a child is disruptive or challenging, but only where this is necessary to prevent injury to others, that child or others, prevent significant damage to property, or maintain discipline and good order. It does not allow corporal punishment, which has been unlawful since 2003. It does not allow punitive, degrading or retaliatory force, or force used for convenience, compliance for its own sake, or where de-escalation could resolve the issue. In terms of maintaining discipline and good order, it is also important to address a misunderstanding about the phrase maintain discipline. In the context of Article 4.1c, maintaining discipline does not mean disciplining a child. It does not refer to punishment, sanctions, or any form of retaliatory physical intervention. It refers to maintaining a safe and orderly environment in which staff can manage an escalating situation, teaching and learning can continue, and risks to pupils or staff can be prevented. It is about preserving safety, stability, and good order, not enforcing compliance for its own sake. The law is clear that force cannot be used as a form of discipline, it cannot be used punitively, and it cannot be used to impose compliance where de-escalation would suffice. Where behaviour seriously compromises good order, preventing teaching from continuing or creating significant disruption, Article 4.1c allows reasonable, proportionate intervention only to restore safety and order. This distinction is fundamental. Article 4 supports safe management and not physical discipline. In terms of reasonable force, there is no rigid legal definition of reasonable force because it is always context specific. However, 3 principles apply. Necessity. Force may only be used where it is genuinely required. Proportionality. It must be the minimum necessary to achieve a safe outcome. Individual circumstances. What is reasonable will depend on the child's age, understanding, sex, and any disability or vulnerability. Reasonable force must not automatically be used, or as reasonable force must not be used automatically or as a punishment. In non-urgent situations, it should only be used when all other strategies have failed, and staff must remain calm, communicate throughout, and cease intervention as soon as it is no longer necessary. The law recognises that reasonable force may be appropriate in certain circumstances, for example where there is a risk of injury, developing danger, or behaviour that seriously compromises good order, but it must always be a last resort. The misrepresentation around Article 4 has in some cases unfairly portrayed the education workforce as routinely using outdated or abusive practices, or using Article 4.1c to justify them, for which there is no evidence. This has contributed to unnecessary fear among some parents and damage to public confidence of practices within schools. Special school practitioners in particular have communicated that they find this narrative deeply distressing. The suggestion that they use Article 4.1c as a licence to harm the children in their care is inaccurate and unfair to staff who work every day with compassion, skill and professionalism to keep some of our most vulnerable pupils safe. I hope this helps provide the committee with a fuller understanding of the position around Article 4.1c. Chair, I want to turn to the second misconception, which is the suggestion that the department has stalled this work or has been insufficiently collaborative or transparent. That is not the case. Since 2020, the department has undertaken extensive sustained engagement with all sectors in good faith, including schools, unions, rights organisations, health representatives, parents and those with lived experience. Far from stalling, the work has progressed through multiple structured phases. In 2021, interim guidance issued in direct response to stakeholder concerns. There was then co-production of the consultation draft guidance. A full public consultation took place in 2023. The Minister agreed in 2024 to establish a task and finish group with key stakeholders to refine a further draft. We held meetings in December 2024, January 2025, February 2025 and April 2025, including several separate sessions convened when collaboration also broke down. Ongoing engagement throughout 2025 with schools, unions, parent groups and rights organisations also continued. At every stage, the department has responded to feedback, shared drafts and confidence, invited challenge and adjusted processes and timelines to ensure all voices were heard. Where time and resource allowed, officials have met with almost every stakeholder who requested a meeting and proactively engaged with others to support the redrafting process. Where disagreements arose, and as you're aware, there are a diversity of strongly held opinions on this issue, they stem from fundamentally different expectations and incompatible policy positions across sectors, particularly between health sector stakeholders and those working in education settings. Progress slowed and became challenging because stakeholder positions diverged, not because the department withdrew or failed to engage. A number of stakeholders wrote to the department setting out firm preconditions for their continued involvement and indicating they would withdraw from the process if those conditions were not met. While stakeholders are absolutely entitled to their views and expectations and the department values their input, policy development can't operate on the basis of ultimatums. We need to work collectively. The department's role is to balance a wide range of perspectives, evidence and statutory responsibilities. One stakeholder chose to withdraw from the task and finish group before any redrafted material had been shared. This early withdrawal did disrupt the process and made progress significantly more difficult, given the influence that withdrawal had on other stakeholder positions and the narrative around the development of the guidance. Nevertheless, the department has continued to move forward, and we now have reached the point where almost reached the point where a new consultation can be launched. Our commitment has been consistent: to collaborate, to listen, to adapt, and to produce guidance that is rights respecting, workable and safe, despite the challenges of withdrawal by stakeholders and criticisms directed at officials throughout the process. I appreciate I've spent some time talking about Article 4.1c and the perception that this work has stalled or been insufficiently collaborative. However, I think it's essential that we set out the detailed legal position in terms of Article 4.1c and the factual position in relation to the manner in which the Department has aimed to develop the guidance, given the focus that there has been on these issues. Chair, turning to where we are now and to provide an outline about what the revised draft guidance that we will be consulting on says and what lies ahead. Despite the challenges, we have strengthened the draft considerably in response to the wide range of views received. The current draft reflects the most up-to-date legal advice, the operational realities of educational settings, a child rights respecting framework, constructive feedback from practitioners, and the complexities raised through engagement with health, rights-based organisations. From the outset, the guidance will be clear that restraint should only be used when all other approaches have been exhausted, and seclusion should only be used in an emergency and as a last resort to prevent serious harm. The purpose of the guidance is not to rewrite behaviour policy in schools, and while the guidance is set firmly in the context of identifying triggers, de-escalation strategies tailored to individual children, and minimising the use of restrictive interventions, it recognises that there may be occasions where restrictive interventions may need to be used, and therefore aims to provide clarity to educational staff on the use of restrictive interventions in educational settings, particularly around the requirement to record and report serious incidents of physical restraint and all incidents of seclusion. The draft guidance aims to provide clear, strengthened direction on when and how restrictive interventions may be used, and to ensure that any restrictive intervention is lawful, proportionate, child-centred, trauma-informed, and used only as a last resort to prevent serious harm. The draft guidance establishes consistent definitions, clarifies legal responsibilities, and reinforces the requirement to record, report, and monitor all serious incidents of physical restraint, all uses of seclusion, and any use of mechanical restraint outside an agreed plan. The principle of the best interest of the child, implemented in Article 3.1 of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, underpins this guidance, so that when restrictive practices are used, they are proportionate and in the best interest of the child. Having considered all of the options carefully, the Department will shortly proceed to a further 12-week public consultation on the revised draft guidance. Undertaking a consultation on the revised guidance provides full transparency by placing the draft guidance in the public domain, enables all stakeholders to consider and respond to the updated draft, and helps reset the public narrative, grounding the debate in the actual text of the guidance rather than broad generalisations. Throughout this next phase, our priorities remain unchanged: ensuring clarity and safeguards for schools, protecting children's rights and welfare, supporting staff to act safely, confidently and proportionately, and delivering guidance that is workable, evidence-based and grounded in the daily realities of education settings. We look forward to receiving the Committee's views on the draft guidance, and following the consultation, the Minister will consider the next steps, although it is likely that executive agreement will be sought on the guidance. In closing, I would again reiterate the purpose of the guidance is to bring clarity to schools on the use of restraint and seclusion. These practices should only ever be used where necessary and proportionate. They should never be used punitively. Seclusion should never be used except in an emergency and as a last resort to prevent serious harm. Serious incidents of restraint and any incidents of seclusion should be recorded and reported to parents. It is essential that the final guidance supports reducing and minimising the use of restrictive interventions, protects and safeguards our most vulnerable learners, reflects the concerns of those with lived experience, and remains deliverable for our schools without unintentionally undermining those positive practices that help children access learning on a daily basis. I'm hopeful that the draft guidance meets all of these objectives, and in doing so will strengthen protections for all. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. And look, this has clearly been quite a vexed and difficult process to get to this stage. So, I mean, I think it is welcome that we're getting something out to public consultation. I think some of the stakeholders who've presented to committee had indicated that they felt that was the next stage to try and move the process on. So I think that is to be welcomed. I just pick up some of the issues around Article 4.1c. So I want to be very clear. I don't think I've ever suggested that teachers are routinely using force to harm or punish children. That's not something I've suggested. But I do think it's appropriate for legislators to reflect on what's on our statute book and if it remains appropriate, because that's the starting point of practice. And so I don't think that's an inappropriate question to say, is this a provision that we're comfortable with in 2026? So I have Article 4.1c open in front of me, and the scenarios that it outlines in terms of when reasonable force can be used in a school is to prevent a pupil from committing any offence, prevent a pupil from causing personal injury or damage to the property of any person, including the pupil themselves. And then we have the third provision around engaging in behaviour prejudicial to the maintenance of good order and discipline. So you talked about any scenario where force, or maybe the phrase restraint or restrictive practice would be used, would only ever be used as an absolute last resort to prevent serious harm. So if we accept that that could be the prevention of a criminal offence being carried out, or injury being caused to somebody, or damage to somebody's property, what other scenarios would you envisage where reasonable force, like physical restraint of a pupil, would be required?
So in terms of the scenarios, within the guidance we don't prescribe scenarios. Obviously, as I mentioned, the context in which schools are operating, different scenarios arise. So the guidance that we have set out provides a framework for with which schools should operate. I don't think it would be helpful for us to set out potential scenarios whenever where you might use force. I think what is more helpful is to set out the definitions and to set out the framework within which schools should operate.
Suppose I asked the question because you'd specifically referenced special school teachers and principals and about their concerns around losing a framework that would give them the opportunity to carry out a restrictive practice when there was a risk of harm to a pupil or a staff member. And I think in a scenario where we often have really highly dysregulated young people who are really struggling with their environment they're in, and that can result in challenging behaviour where there may need to be an intervention, but we would hope intervention could happen much, much earlier in the process so we'd ever reach that stage. But if we have provisions on the statute book that allow an intervention that are going to prevent an injury, what else? What other scenario would you say that you've referenced, or what other scenarios are special school leaders asking for where they could carry out that sort of intervention? Other than to prevent an injury?
I don't think any of our schools are sitting using Article 4.1c or anything on the statute book to make decisions. I
would suggest that our legislation doesn't matter. What is on the statute book clearly matters.
It does, it clearly matters and it sets out the law, but if an incident happens in a special school or a mainstream school, what principals and what school leaders and what our teachers and classroom assistants generally do is they risk assess, they look for de-escalation strategies, they go through a range of de-escalation strategies before they would move to something more restrictive. And the guidance as we have drafted it really focuses on that as a last resort we would only be intervening. I suppose another example you could use where maybe there has been an incident in the school where other pupils are maybe at risk. There has been that is where maybe
at risk of injury.
At risk of injury,
so which is already provided for.
etc. etc. Schools might choose to move and use a more restrictive intervention, but it's after that de-escalation piece has taken.
I want to be really clear in terms of just how I frame my question, because I meet special school staff and leaders all the time, and I meet teachers in mainstream settings all the time, and I'm not being lobbied or no one's asking me we need power to intervene to maintain good order. They do raise concerns around injury, and when we have dysregulated children and young people potentially being at risk of harm to themselves, to others and to staff members. But Article 4.1a and b, or certainly Article 4.1b, provides for that prevention of injury. So it's just trying to understand what, because you specifically referenced that special school leaders are really nervous about losing the provisions of Article 4.1c. What aspect have they raised? Because they've never raised that with me. If you said they couldn't intervene to prevent an injury, then absolutely they'd be saying that's going to cause a problem. But I'm wondering just what are the other scenarios they're raising with the department that you're keen to keep on the statute book?
So specifically in terms of the special school principals, their concerns are around the narrative that Article 4.1c is being, I suppose, used, etc.
Not perpetuating that, because I know that they have to intervene if there's a risk of harm, absolutely, and so
more
and
broadly speaking, more broadly speaking, the teaching unions representing all of the teacher unions have also raised concerns, and their position would be that they would not be in favour of repealing Article 4.1c at this time.
And we've heard that evidence from them. Look, I'll not take up any more time other than with a final question. Can I take from your evidence today that there is a clear line in the sand being drawn from the 2022 recommendations from the department accepted by the then Education Minister Michelle McIlveen that Article 4.1c should be repealed? Or we now that's the clarity that will not be happening under the remit of this minister, is that correct?
No, the Minister is consulting on the basis of the present legislation. He will consider the consultation responses as once that has completed. At this point, the Minister hasn't reached any conclusion. He's reached no concluded view on the matter. And I suppose, however, in terms of timing, there is a challenge in terms of timing in this current mandate if we were to change legislation. But the Minister has no concluded view on this. He has not said either way. We will consult on the guidance as drafted, and then he'll take on board the views before he comes to a final decision.
Well, as I said at the outset, getting something out to public consultation is welcome, and we can hear all those views in the round. I'll bring in the Deputy Chair, and then anyone else who wants to come in. Yeah.
Claire, in a situation where an autistic child in a mainstream class was stimming with his hands and the teacher tied his hands to the chair with a school bag, would that be proportionate?
I don't think that would be acceptable under our draft guidance.
Would it be lawful?
No.
Or in the best interest of the child?
So under our draft guidance makes clear where a child who perhaps in that situation as you describe is stimming or is I suppose displaying behaviours that are related to a condition that...
If a child was tethered to a fence, would that be proportionate or lawful or in the best interest of the child?
Again, under the draft guidance, that would not be acceptable.
Or if a child was strapped into a chair, as was the case with young Harry Shakespeare.
So in terms of the use of chairs and equipment, the position on that is slightly different. So within schools, you will be aware that some children and young people do need to use equipment, and that is usually prescribed by an allied health professional. That is usually put in place with a particular plan, agreed with the school, with the parent, etc. So use of that equipment within that absolutely is acceptable,
of course, in the
but
case
there shouldn't be use outside that.
In the case of Harry Shakespeare's parents, they weren't aware that it was happening, and in the case of the child being tethered to the fence, which actually happened, the parents only found out when the yearbook was sent home and they saw a photo of what had happened. And the reason I'm raising these cases is because, I mean, they all sit outside, this Article 4.1c. To me, they all appear to be unlawful. Certainly, if not unlawful, certainly not proportionate, and definitely not in the best interest of the child. Now, the Task and Finish group was given a particular remit, and 3 of the most reputable organisations that you could think of, and certainly from whom we have received evidence in this committee, have walked away from that because they believe there isn't a serious attempt on the part of the Minister to bring in proper legislative reform or robust statutory guidance. The Children's Law Centre, if there is any issue around the rights of a child and someone comes to my constituency office or to me and it's something I can't deal with, I refer to the Children's Law Centre. one of the most comprehensive and authoritative presentations I've ever had the privilege to hear in this committee was when Rosaleen Kelly from the RCN gave her presentation about the guidelines within the health service. And we can't understand why the Minister is so reluctant to accept those. And the Children's Commissioner has also walked away. And I suppose the question is, Claire, is this not now a complete and utter dog's dinner?
Okay, you've a couple of points to pick up through out that. So first of all, just to make really clear, in terms of Harry Shakespeare's experience and the other parents that we have met with, and the Minister has met with, that is the reason why we are working on guidance. You know, that guidance is to ensure that their experiences aren't experienced by other
Why
parents.
have the three of the most reputable organisations walked away from this?
So in terms of the withdrawal of organisations from the Task and Finish group, from our perspective that's disappointing. The Task and Finish group was put together because we recognised that there were issues with the draft guidance we consulted on. We wanted to bring our education stakeholders and our health stakeholders and our child's rights organisations all together. Previously we had a number of different groups. We wanted to bring them all together to try and work through those outstanding issues. In terms of the organisations deciding to withdraw, there was different points at which they did withdraw. One withdrew at the very start of the process, the other two withdrew when they seen some draft guidance. Ideally, we want everybody to be round the table and work through the draft guidance and work through it line by line and actually help us develop a piece of guidance which is acceptable to everybody. So that's unfortunate, and the department, we remain open to engaging with everybody. We remain open to engaging with both Children's Law Centre, NICI and RCN on that.
But Claire, I mean, fundamentally, the issue here is that these groups and organisations that we're talking about here don't believe that the draft guidance is meeting basic children's rights protections. And as a result of that, would you not accept and would you not agree with me that this process has lost all credibility?
No.
A brief answer.
No, the department's intention, despite the withdrawal of those stakeholders, you know, the department's intention remains that we produce guidance that is fit for purpose, it's lawful, it's child's rights centred, and it's deliverable in education settings. We're going out to consultation. There'll be a further opportunity for views, but this guidance is something that is needed. This guidance is something that schools want in place, and this guidance is something that we are committed to moving forward.
And despite the withdrawal of these organisations, you still believe the process is credible?
We have no reason, you know, withdrawal of those organisations.
What's your view of the Children's Law Centre and the RCN and the Children's Commissioner? Do you think they're not organisations worth listening to? Do you not think it would have taken an awful lot for them to have withdrawn from this process?
We absolutely think they're organisations worth listening to, and actually in all of our drafting we have taken on board all of their feedback, we've taken on board all of their views and have made, you know, one of the organisations on the previous guidance actually named the title, they provided the title of the guidance, so absolutely. But we'd much rather everybody was round the table and we could work through the issues with the guidance rather than having groups withdrawing. I think it would be much more productive, and we'd end up with better guidance if everybody was round the table actually resolving the issues.
Okay, thanks.
Close it there. Thank you, Deputy Chair. David?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation so far. I think there's no surprise, to be honest. I've been on record a couple of times now in the committee saying that it's one issue that I find difficult to get my head around and come to a firm position on. So I don't think it's any. I'm certainly not surprised that at times people find it difficult to find what side of the line they're on in regards to this. I would say, following on from what Pat has said, you know, I think NICI, RCN, and Children's Law Centre are voices worth listening to. What I don't think is that they are voices from on high. That if they have a particular position or things aren't going their way, that we must take their position. and I've been clear about that in the past too. But I've no doubt to come to this issue with in good faith. I asked the Children's Law Centre when they were here about 4.1c, and I asked them directly around the case of Harry Shakespeare, and Deirdre Shakespeare was here, and we all, I think, admire the campaign that she has fought around this, and the reasons why she has done so. But I asked, was the treatment of Harry, would it have been 4.1c compliant? Now, the answer from the Children's Law Centre there was no, they didn't believe it would be. Pat has just said that he believes the behaviours that he outlined fall outside of Article 4.1c. I completely agree. I think some of those things are abhorrent and definitely fall outside and should be prosecuted. So I have no hesitation in saying that. So I struggle then to, in my own thinking, and this shouldn't be an ideological issue, it should be an issue we're thinking about in terms of how this helps children and teachers and that are facing these situations. How then would the removal of 4.1c assist in those cases? Because it's already something that people who want to see that result are saying falls beyond 4.1c and doesn't think it justifies it. Would you agree with that?
So in terms of some of the, I suppose some of the experiences of parents and some of the cases that we have seen, I think it's really important to acknowledge, and I think it's on the record that there has been poor practice. There have been experiences that should not have happened. Whether they would fall within or without Article 4.1c and the law, I don't think that's something that I'm going to go into on each individual case right now. But I think what is important is that our intention in terms of the guidance is to make sure that that type of incident is picked up, that staff are confident, that staff are aware of what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, if staff are aware of what a restrictive intervention is, what might be construed as a restrictive intervention, what is restraint, what is seclusion, and what considerations should be taken in place. The other important bit is about reporting and recording, and that's something previously that may have helped. So in terms of Article 4.1c, there'll be different answers depending in the individual cases, but in the majority of cases, what I do think is if schools, and what schools have told us, if they had clear guidance, it would help them understand what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is lawful, and what's in the best interests of the children and young people in their care.
And I think in terms of those arguing for the repeal of 4.1c, one of the main justifications that I hear is the sort of removal of what they see as a grey area. They would argue that it's giving teachers clarity around what they can. My fear around it, and why I've hesitated to support that, is that it may be clarity, but I fear that it may be too great a disincentive that fears that would stop a teacher stepping in when it's appropriate to do so. Would you agree with me that actually if the symbolic nature of removing that clause would actually speak to a lot of teachers around what and it give a little bit of fear and hesitancy to them and how they may act going forward, even as a last resort?
That position would reflect some of the feedback that we have received from some of our educationalists. Yes, absolutely. But again, in terms of what they really are asking for is clarity, is guidance, is clarity, and is to be clear on what they can and can't do and what they need to be putting in place in their schools. I
think even in your presentation today you've given a remarkable amount of clarity in terms of the department's position around this, and teachers listening to it I would hope would be more informed. Listen, I don't have criticisms to make of anyone with a different position than themselves in this. I'm not even, as I've said, it's not my most concrete position that I have. I'm open and listening, and I've heard even parents of children with special needs have discussed it with me in different ways and would take slightly more nuanced and different opinions on it. So I respect all of those views, but I thank you for your presentation today, and thank you for answering the questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Cathy, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair. So we heard from Children's Law Centre, Nikki and Deirdre Shakespeare, and it was a really, really moving story that Deirdre had heard. We've heard it before, but every time we hear it, it still hits us hard. And Claire, I acknowledge that you said that the Minister has met with Deirdre, but meeting with her is completely different to actually acting upon that meeting and doing something. And I think that's what we heard very clearly from Deirdre, where she felt very concerned and very worried about. And I don't think that she will have much comfort in the fact that you've said that Children's Law Centre and Nicky were involved in the title of the guidance. And all those other parents out there, I'm not sure that that will give them any comfort. It's about the content and how it's going to be implemented. And what we heard very clearly was that they just can't understand where the department's reluctance was to engage with what their views were, and what their recommendations would have been. And I think 3 or 4 of us probably asked the same questions as to what was that. So I'm hoping maybe you can give us some clarity on that. What was the reluctance? Then the other thing was, like, we know safeguarding has to act in both directions. It has to protect staff from harm, but it has to protect our children from harmful practices as well. And I know that the DE has said to parents and in meetings that restrictive practice is rare, but would you not agree with me that the lack of the actual recording of these instances, or actually identifying what actually accumulates as a restrictive practice, is not really allowing for proper oversight in that? And then so many children who are impacted by this are non-speaking or have really significant difficulties in communicating. If those children are not able to repeat, and we heard horrific stories around that, if they're not able to report what is actually happening to them, what safeguards does the department believe that there are currently that are strong enough to ensure that these children are protected? Do you think these children are actually currently protected?
So, first of all, just to pick up in terms of the point around the title of the guidance, that was just an example. You know, the previous version of the guidance, all of the children's rights organisations, all the stakeholders had input into it. All of the changes, well, the majority of the changes that were put forward were made on the version that we consulted on. So it was much more than just a title change. So there is no reluctance to engage. We are more than happy to engage with any stakeholder. To give you an example, and you know, I have met with Deirdre on a number of occasions, and Deirdre's Deirdre's story and what Harry has gone through is particularly, and I know it's so difficult for her to explain that every time that she does. Whenever we were drafting the previous version of the guidance, I met with a number of the parents and walked them through the guidance and took on board as much feedback as we could. You know, some elements of the guidance we made changes to reflect some of their suggestions. So we have tried as far as possible to make sure that their views are reflected, and also to make sure that their experiences, and you know, looking at it through the lens of their experiences, to see, you know, is there anything additional we could include in the guidance, etc., etc. In terms of your comments around, you know, recording, that is why we need guidance. You know, it's to make it really clear what is a restrictive intervention, what actually, you know, what is restraint, what is seclusion, to set that out really, really clearly, and to give really clear definitions that are consistent across the education sector, and also to put a framework in place for recording and reporting of those incidents. In terms of the current system, you know, I think in terms of the schools that we are engaging with, they already do have in place systems to record and report where incidents of restrictive practices come. One of the special schools that we've engaged with extensively, and I'm not going to go into specific individual schools, but one of the special schools we've engaged with extensively has had significant input into the guidance and have reflected how they record, how they report, how they engage with parents, how they take on board lessons learned, and how they work, you know, if an intervention is used, how they work to make sure the next time that actually is there something that could have been done differently. And that's what we're really trying to do throughout this process, is to change and to put that framework in place, so all schools are really, really clear on what a restrictive intervention is, what needs to be recorded, what happens afterwards. So hopefully, we have been listening, we have been taking all of that feedback on board. And as I said, as we go out to consultation, I'm more than happy to engage directly again with individual parents, with individual groups, and go through and see if there are any other areas in that guidance we can strengthen.
And again,
I'll comment, Kathy.
Again, there's a difference between engaging with them and actually taking on board that their recommendations are. And like Pat alluded to, they're the experts in children's rights in this, and I'm not sure that fills me with much confidence either, because engaging and actually taking on board is two different things. In terms of that, sure, I know it's time, but just that those children who are non-speaking and who do have communication difficulties, what safeguards are there in place right now for those children?
And I think that's a really important point. But I think, in terms of our schools have access to a range of training through the Education Authority and through other means to help them identify, and understand communications, understand behaviours, and help them identify where there might be issues. Most schools do have processes in place where if there is something unusual, they will report back to parents, they will have a discussion with parents. So there are processes in place, but the hope is that the guidance will strengthen that, and will make that, I suppose, consistent across the piece for all children and young people.
I'll have to move to the next member. It's John.
Thank you, that was very informative. Could I say at the outset, I want to speak up for the teachers who do an incredibly hard job. And I've heard this commentary in policing, both from interest groups and from many politicians who do not understand what it is like to have a professional responsibility to step in a dynamic and uncertain situation. Not only where you're frightened for the safety of your pupils, yourself, but also your career. Because people are quick to jump up and down and second guess you from a distance. So I want to also ask, before I get on to the specific article in question, reasonable force is defined many times in law, in fact common law. It's about proportionality, necessity, and doing it for a legitimate aim. We can overcomplicate this, but the first thing I would say is, looking at it from the other perspective, the amount of injuries that teachers are sustaining. I note that around 300 primary school teachers were injured in the last year. Almost all of the teachers that get injured in our schools from early years to secondary school are in P1 and P2. So I'm actually asking the question from a different perspective. What is the department doing to actually have a plan to reduce the number of injuries that our school teachers are getting in school, and make sure they have the training, the equipment and the support to be able to do their job without going home with injuries?
Okay, so a couple of things on that. So first of all, in terms of this issue, there's, I suppose, the Education Authority are working on separate guidance around violence at work, and that is going through their governance procedures at the minute. Our guidance is very much focused on the use of restraint and seclusion, restrictive practices, and setting a framework out for that.
Violence at work, sorry, what are you talking about? Children's behaviour there, or are you talking about some other type of violence?
Their guidance covers a range of scenarios.
Talk about dysregulated children. So I'm in P1 and P2, and I'm speaking to teachers who have broken teeth, broken arms, kicked in the chest, have been home with concussion, none of whom actually get a follow-up phone call from anyone in the department or anyone in the Education Authority. So is there an injury reduction plan in terms of how teachers are having to deal with dysregulated young people?
So it's something I can pick up with the Education Authority, and I can come back to you on that. What is in place is a range of training and a range of support for staff in schools. So first of all, the Education Authority have been involved in this and on our groups the whole way through. So they know the direction of travel. They have been feeding into this. They have a range of training where the focus is on de-escalation, the focus is on minimising these types of incidents. So that's available to staff. There's also a range of other supports, for teachers and for school staff where there is an incident that has happened, and I can certainly get you a bit more detail on that from the Education Authority.
What about special education needs children? And by the way, we'll say at the outset, these are vulnerable children. They have additional needs. This isn't about blame. I don't even call what they say as assault. It's just the child's dysregulating and needs some form of intervention. The mainstream teachers who have special education needs children in their school do not have access to Team Teach. Is that correct or not?
So in terms of Team Teach is available to special schools. In the main, it's not available to mainstream schools. However, the Education Authority have developed other training, which is available to all schools.
That's available now?
It's available now, and I think there's a pilot underway. I think maybe 20 schools are taking up new additional training, which they're bringing on board in response to some of the...
Because it seems to me there's horse, there's cart, and we've got them the wrong way around. We're asking mainstream schools to accept special education needs children, and that inclusion is something they accept, but actually the training and support seems to come after. So for example, I've asked, are there availability of spit guards and bite guards in schools, and I'm told no. And therefore I go into teachers, and this is where the Children's Law Society, and I've dealt with these individuals within the police, and they've been against every use of force that I've ever come into contact with them about. They're not sitting with broken fingers. I go into special education needs schools and mainstream schools that teach special education needs. I see the hands are chewed off our teachers. And I'm disappointed that the whole perspective of this is about looking at the teacher's use of force when they're the ones getting injured.
So I think it's really, really important to make sure that the child is at the centre of this.
100%.
So
but we need to make sure that the teacher is fully supported, knowledge, equipment, and feels the support that they can do their job safely without getting injured in a way that doesn't injure the child. There is a balance here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's why the guidance combined with the training should help support schools in that regard.
Final question, if a teacher gets knocked out at school by a pupil, intentionally or because of dysregulation, should nobody in the Education Authority or Education Department not make a follow-up phone call to them at home? I used to be in the police service, and I always rang my officers who had been assaulted and off work for a week. I would ring them and say, you know what, thinking about you, we'll make sure that's... acknowledge it. My understanding is there's no formal protocol in place that someone from the Department of the Education Authority at least picks up the phone and says, acknowledge what happened to you, your thoughts are with us, and make sure the school are looking at it.
I just ask for a brief answer.
In cases like that in the department, we typically wouldn't be advised if there was an individual incident. If something had happened, it's unless we've received a piece of correspondence or we've received something.
No map. So if a teacher's knocked out in school tomorrow and goes to hospital with a concussion, you're telling me there's no system in place that gets automatically recorded and
something we can raise with the EA.
So the department would not have that information, but there will be a recording of incidents and it's fed through. My understanding is it's fed through to the EA. And there's a process there in terms of accidents, in terms of incidents that EA look after, but it doesn't.
The follow-up phone call be
something. John, I'm just asking we bring this to a close, but we can pick it up as an action at the end in terms of any follow-up you might want to raise in relation to the EA. Dana, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Start with quite a wee simple one. Claire, have you responded to the Children's Law Centre and the Children's Commissioner when they've informed you that they've left the task finish process?
So to date, we haven't formally responded to Nikki or the Children's Law Centre, and the reason for that is over the last number of months we've been working out in terms of the next steps. We've been seeking advice, legal advice on the guidance, versions of the guidance. We will write to the Children's Law Centre and Nikki in due course.
Disappointing, to be honest with you, especially when we heard from them when they says the ministers refused to meet with them, also refused to meet with their youth advisory group. What message is that sending? What message is the department and the minister sending here?
So in terms of the requests to meet the minister on this specific issue, I'm not familiar with the request around the youth group. At that time, they were engaged in the process with the task and finish group, and I think the minister felt that was he was content with that process. I can't speak, for the minister directly.
The department can't respond to them. The minister can't meet them. As it's not a very nice message to be sent out on very serious
we
issues.
will respond to them, and as I said, I am more than happy. I'd be delighted if Children's Law Centre and Nikki would want to come and sit down and go through the guidance.
What changed from 2022 when, broadly speaking, the stakeholders were on board? What has changed?
So in terms of 2022, what I suppose, the stakeholders were on board. I think it's probably fair to say the stakeholders were on board with the recommendations. At that stage in 2022, there was interim guidance had been published, and then we went into a process where we were drafting and developing the first guidance that was consulted on. I think it's probably fair to say in that process we had a piece of guidance that we put out to consultation that had input from a wide range of organisations. We actually had some organisations then coming back on some of the input they had provided, and I suppose criticising some of that. So in terms of what has changed, there's been an emergence of really divergent views. There's some examples, within that consultation where there's different groups have different opinions, and the issue then that we had was on the back of that consultation we needed to find a way to move forward. So the position hasn't changed, as I said earlier on, that we still want to have, our intention is still to have guidance which is lawful, child rights centred, deliverable, etc, etc.
How do you deal without key stakeholders?
So as I said earlier, I can't speak for those stakeholders. As I said earlier, our preference would be that all of the stakeholders would remain engaged in the process and give us the feedback on the actual guidance. The feedback we've received to date, some of the feedback we've received to date actually is quite broad and quite high level, and for us what would be really helpful would have been if organisations had come and worked through the guidance with us.
I'm sure it wasn't a very easy decision for them to take. They must have really serious concerns to withdraw from such a process. These are like the Children's Law Centre, the Children's Commissioner, RCN.
And again, that's a matter for their organisations. As I said, the department's position is that we would like those organisations to be engaged in that process, in this process.
All right, so I'm going to go on to the recording and reporting. Is there not a danger here that this would only apply to serious cases?
So in terms of recording and reporting, and I'm not going to go into the detail of the actual guidance, that's because it'll be published in due course. The expectation is that serious cases of restraint, all cases of seclusion would be recorded, and within the guidance we have tried to articulate and give, I suppose, school staff a framework within.
What happens if it's not identified as a restrictive practice, as being serious, and it's not recorded? Because that's exactly what happened to Harry, isn't it?
So a restrictive practice is an umbrella term for a whole range of different interventions. So what actually, and again, I'm not really comfortable going into individual cases, but the guidance takes on board what happened in that situation and has tried to make clear what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. What isn't acceptable is if equipment or things are happening outside an agreed plan, outside where parents aren't aware. So we have tried to take that on board, and that's one of the things that we've tried to reflect in terms of the recording and the reporting.
You'd accept that if it's not identified as a serious case, then it wouldn't be identified as a restrictive practice?
I think in terms of identifying a serious case, that's quite subjective. As I said at the outset, this is all, these judgments are all made within the context of an actual individual situation. The idea of the guidance is to make sure that our teachers, our school leaders, etc., are really clear on what all the definitions are and are really clear on what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and what steps they need to take. So,
say something were to happen then, I'm getting into hypotheticals here, but a child was placed face down in a practice, but it isn't identified as being serious.
Well, I think
that keeps happening.
Final
and that keeps happening. It is a restrictive practice. but it's not identified, it's not reported.
That's why we want to have guidance in place to make sure that any incidents of any
it's not just serious. That was my point.
So
yeah.
you're talking about restraint, not necessarily a restrictive practice. So restrictive practice is an umbrella term for a range of different things. Okay, but if what you've described there would be an incident of restraint, and that would be recorded, would be reported, and would be fed back to parents, and there would be a process put in place.
To close that there, Michelle, you were next.
Thanks, folks. Again, I mean, this has been a really interesting session again on this issue, and all these questions are genuinely to really understand this, because it is such a sensitive issue, and it has been, I guess, unresolved for quite a while now. You've talked about openness and transparency being important in the process. The original consultation that you spoke about, did you publish the consultation responses to that?
Not to date. We haven't published the consultation responses to date, but whenever we're bringing forward the next version, we'll give an overview of the consultation.
Why they haven't been published to date? It would have been helpful, obviously, through this process.
So I think our focus has really been on dealing with those big outstanding issues. And I think in terms of the consultation feedback, and we will share that. You know, there were in terms of responses, you know, there were only 144 responses received. They were quite diverging. There was quite diverging views across the board. So, you know, there were a couple of big areas where we needed to look at the guidance again. So our focus had been on, you know, setting up the task and finish script, moving that forward. And as I said, you know, the intention would be to provide an overview of the previous consultation alongside the next version.
In other circumstances, the Minister was clear that legislation had to come before guidance, for example, the uniform legislation. So we're going to have guidance here consulted on, but the legislative position remains unclear. I mean, this does represent a U-turn from Minister McIlveen's recommendations. So if the consultation makes a robust case to repeal Article 4.1c, is the Department open to act on that?
So that the consultation that we have, obviously we can't draft guidance based on legislation that doesn't exist, and that's, you know, that's a given. In terms of the consultation, if there is something that we need to take on board, absolutely. But as I said earlier on, you know, the Minister doesn't have a concluded view on this. He will take on board what comes out of the consultation, but he has made that clear that he wanted to consider the draft guidance and then consider the Article 4.1c issue in the context of that.
You've mentioned concerns about the unions being a reason not to repeal Article 4.1c. Why were the unions not part of the task and finish group?
So in terms of the task and finish group, the unions were invited to join the task and finish group, and I think there might have been an administrative issue at some point. But I suppose to assure you, then we rectified that. We followed that up, and we have met with both the teaching and non-teaching unions a number of times. They have had an opportunity to be walked through the guidance, a line by line walk through. We shared some of the draft guidance, so they were invited, and I just don't think they had the opportunity to put somebody forward.
This feels like it would have helped the process in terms of where we've ended up. We have time for one more, if that's okay. Yeah. I think it's fair to say you've been critical, maybe even defensive about the framing of the debate, and I think that's been unfair. I probably would echo what the chair said in the sense that I've met with special schools. They're looking for clarity here, but no one's ever been accusing them of wanting to use this for good order or being critical of how our teachers behave in those settings, and I just want to make that really clear, and I don't think it's fair to characterise anybody's concerns around this process in that way. But do we have an accurate sense of the scale of this issue? So, like, how many incidents of restraint are recorded annually in Northern Ireland schools? Does the Department accept that there are many restrictive practices that are not being recorded or categorised properly?
So the Department does not collect this information at the time, and you know
that. You accept those.
So that is one of the things that when we have guidance in place, and that's one of the reasons we need to put this guidance in place, because it will give us an overview, you know, through the reporting and the recording of what the issues are. It'll allow us to put interventions, etc., training, etc., in place if we need to. In terms of the cases that are reported through to the Department, the cases that we're aware of, it's quite a small number. That's not to say that there are other cases that we aren't aware of. But in terms of the cases that of that we are aware of, it would be very, very small.
Cara, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to the panel for being here today and offering us more insight into what is really a complex piece of work. One of the main things that's jumped out at me is regarding data. I know Kathy had touched on there. I'm just curious, does the department hold data on whether children with SEN are disproportionately subjected to restraint or restrictive practices, and particularly with regards the incidents like Harry Shakespeare, which took place a number of years ago? What has your department done or changed with regards policies and protocols when it comes to keeping data on these incidents?
So I think first of all, in terms of data, as I just mentioned, that is one of the I suppose the aims in terms of the guidance that we're recording, we're better understanding what is happening in schools. I think it's probably important, and I should have said that schools are recording. We do know that schools are recording and reporting and keeping records of incidents as well, which we're just not, we don't lift that up at a departmental level. And again, we want to ensure consistency on that. In terms of what has changed, we put the interim guidance out in 2021 in direct response to some of these issues raised. The review that was taken forward under, I think, the previous minister, was in response to some of these issues. So and then the work that we are taking forward, the previous consultation and then the forthcoming consultation, is all directly in response to these issues having been raised with the department. And I'm hopeful that following this consultation we can bring that to a conclusion and we can get some final guidance finalised and published, and that schools have that to support them to try and reduce and minimise these incidents.
Can I just ask then, following incidents like this, what support is currently offered to these children and to their families following these kinds of incidents?
Okay, so in terms of what support is offered, more broadly speaking, in a number of schools that they will put in place a follow-up process where there's a discussion and engagement in terms of what can be done differently, what might happen differently. In terms of supports, there's a range of supports. So first of all, in terms of the post-primary piece, I think we had provided you with some of this information in the last couple of weeks. Obviously there's the Hope service in post-primary school where if a child needs access to counselling or supports in terms of emotional health and well-being, and in terms of primary schools and special schools, obviously special schools have access to Hope. Primary schools, there's interventions and support available through a range of health provisions as well.
In terms of this, just off the back of that, do you know how long these processes are taking for these children and these families to get that support? Are we talking a couple of months, weeks?
So it very much, in terms of, say, for example, the Hope service, it very much depends on the individual school. And I suppose the demand on services in terms of the health services, again, it depends on the individual area and the demand on those services. So I suppose what I can say is there are services available. In terms of the timing and the access, that will depend and will vary across the province.
And just lastly then, in the interest of time, just broadening slightly, suspension in special schools is up from 17 suspensions in the year of 2021 to then 26 in 2024. Many parents have voiced they feel this is another way of removing SEN children from the classroom setting when they may not have the capacity to understand the punishment. Can you speak to that at all, why they're on the rise, or have you yourself looked into this further?
So I think in terms of suspensions, and Michael can keep me right here, we have seen an increase in suspensions, particularly post-COVID across the board. In terms of the reasons for that, we haven't done any specific research into the reasons for that. We do engage with the Education Authority. The majority of suspensions are around infringement of school rules, and that's quite a broad topic. But I do acknowledge there have been an increase in the numbers of suspensions. I think that probably reflects some of the experiences that are also being reported, from schools as well. But I think the focus needs to be on, addressing the needs of the child. in Education Welfare Service and the Education Authority have put in place a number of initiatives funded through the department. So, for example, restorative practices, there's a big focus on restorative practices to try and reduce the number of suspensions, and to try and, where there is conflict, maybe where there are challenges, to try and address that. They've also brought in, as well as the Education Authority teams, community organisations and a community focus to try and address some of that as well. But absolutely, the numbers have risen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Cara, and Peter, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your evidence this afternoon. And the Deputy Chair outlined some pretty harrowing examples at the start of some practices that have gone on, and certainly in my time off and on this committee, I think that's exactly how I described them, as quite harrowing, and that's obviously not what we want to see. In terms of the guidance, Claire, that the department is putting together here, would it be fair to say that you're trying to, produce some guidance that protects pupils and teachers? Maybe that strikes some balance and brings clarity, and that was a word that was used quite a bit. Would that be a fair comment?
Yes, I think so. In terms of the guidance, it's making sure that obviously the primary consideration is the best interest of the child, but it's also setting out, and as you said, providing clarity for teachers around what is a restrictive intervention, what is a restraint, what is a seclusion, and as I've said a couple of times previously there, what actions need to be taken and when. So the guidance is designed with the best interests of the child at the centre, but also, to ensure that staff and school staff are really clear and protected on what they can and can't do.
That's fine. Just want to come to, because there's been a lot of chat about this membership of the Restraint and Seclusion Task and Finish Group. Did I get that title right? I think there's a few I'm looking at here. Am I right in saying so far that 3 organisations at some point then left that group? My understanding was that they were NICI, the RCN and the Children's Law Centre. Yeah. Is it also the case that the vast majority of organisations and stakeholders stayed on that group?
So in terms of the Task and Finish group, the RCN left in February 2025, and that was after the first meeting took place in December 2024. And their correspondence, I think, came in February 2025 to say they weren't participating. I think we've shared that with the committee and my responses to that, so you should have sight of that. Then, in terms of Children's Law Centre and NICI, they remained in the Task and Finish group and remained involved in the process, and they withdrew. We shared the draft guidance for comment and for I suppose for input in July. I think it was the 7th of July 2025. Yep. And they wrote to the department at that stage in August to withdraw from the process. So they did. In terms of the other groups, we have the Public Health Agency remain on the group but have raised some concerns around the guidance, and all of the education stakeholders remain on the group, with the exception of one who left because of resourcing issues rather than an issue with the group.
Castle Gardens?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So far so good. Would I also be right in saying that you would have preferred if RCN, NICI and the Children's Law Centre would have stayed? Is it fair to say the department would have preferred them to stay?
Absolutely. I think that, had we had all stakeholders round the table and had those, we did have a workshop in June, which was particularly useful. I think, and then I did some more work in the guidance. I think if we had all stakeholders, including Children's Law Centre and NICI, round the table, and that was the intention of the group, is to bring all of those views together, that we could have worked through those issues. But I think what we really need is to really understand what are the specific issues within the draft guidance. I think some of the feedback that we've received to date is quite broad around the guidance as a whole, but it would be really useful if everybody was around the table and helping us identify what are the specifics, the specific issues they have with the actual draft.
Yeah. Again, I'm looking at the Task and Finish group membership here. It's interesting. You mentioned there's a lot of primary schools here, Education Authority and 2 EOTIS, and as you mentioned, Castle Gardens left, but that wasn't due to the guidance. That was priorities and time constraints. So actually, am I right in saying that all the front-facing, all the service delivery groups stayed on the Task and Finish group, yes. With the exception of Castle Gardens, who left for different reasons? and the 3 that did leave weren't actually involved in the direct delivery of education in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, that's correct. And all of the educationalists, I suppose, the school representatives that remained on the group were content. We made some further changes based on their feedback to the guidance, and they were broadly content with the guidance following that drafting process. So there were some changes made based on that, but they've all indicated their content and felt that the guidance as drafted is actually deliverable. One of their concerns was that the guidance had to be deliverable within an education setting. So I think, there's been quite a discussion around, lifting the Department of Health regional policy, and why could we not use that? The feedback from our educational stakeholders is that some of what was in that policy wouldn't have applied. So it was really important to them that what was in the guidance made sense from an education perspective, was deliverable in a school, which is very different from a clinical setting. So overall, they did remain in the group, and they're content with the guidance as currently drafted.
Yeah, I did notice that, and I'll finish with this, Chair. I mean, just some people are sort of saying, there's health guidance out there, and why do you just sort of take it and use it in schools? And actually, I thought that was quite an unusual argument, because they're 2 very, very different contexts. And actually, I personally would be relying on the guidance from our principals and school leaders in terms of what that guidance should look like, and thankfully you've got them all on the task and finish script. So that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. And thanks to all members for all your questions, and to the departmental officials for your time and your evidence today, and we'll pick up any follow-up actions from there. So just and yes, grand to make your way out. In terms of any follow-up actions, I wanted just to highlight, I think, and John, in your questioning, you had asked about any protocols that exist when an injury is sustained in a school, in terms of any protocols that the EA would have in relation to engagement with the school and the teacher on the back of that. So I would certainly be happy to propose, if we write to the EA, to seek clarity on that. I did just want to note just a slight point of concern, and it was around, I think you'd made a suggestion, John, around sort of the use of spit guards, and you'd reference to quite young children, and I would have a concern around that. It's a very, very severe intervention with real risk of harm and risk of asphyxiation, would be my understanding with a spit guard. I understand you're quite entitled to raise it as an option, but I would like to suggest to get clarity from the EA, from their perspective of the children's welfare perspective, if that is something that they would be able to recommend to schools, because I would be worried teachers would be very concerned if they were being asked to do that, because of the risks associated.
To be absolutely clear, that is for the teacher, it's not for the child. Okay. So it's not as in the police use of a spit hood, which goes over the head of the.
There was just, it's important to clarify that, because you were contextualising in the police context, and I think that it led me to think you were suggesting. The
ones that are used special education, we've got the bite guards, which are for their arms and hands of the teacher, and then a spit. If you're being spat at, you can actually cover your own face for infection control. So it's not actually about covering the child.
That's a really important
the
clarification.
Visor, kind of?
The visor, yeah.
Really helpful clarification, John,
the hood.
because I do think you had sort of put some of it into a policing context, which I think will have caused some alarm potentially for people. So it would be helpful then perhaps to broaden that out to the EA, to suggest what sort of equipment that they would actually recommend for usage in schools, and what is made available to teachers, if that is a helpful request.
Jared, I would like to, we talk about these things theoretically. I would like us to actually see the equipment that is currently being used, because there is stuff that's allocated to special education needs schools, such as bite guards. And I think I actually would like to physically see them, because we're doing an inquiry here, and I would like to see them for myself.
Well, certainly, before the clerk has a heart attack, we're not doing an inquiry into restrictive practice.
No, into special education needs.
Okay,
but this
sorry,
is
just to be
part
clear.
of that.
We're definitely not doing that. But no, in terms of the inquiry, well, I mean, as a action, and I know Danny wanted to come in, EA protocol in relation to an incident when a staff member is injured, what the protocol is there in terms of engagement, and perhaps what equipment they make available to mainstream schools and special schools in terms of keeping staff safe. Danny?
All I can think about is Judge Dredd there. That's all I can envisage our teachers looking like. See, as regards to they haven't even replied to Children's Law and the NICI. That's August. That's what, 7-8 months ago. How can you sit there and say that, you know, we want everyone to engage? You don't even formally recognise that they've left the process. What efforts were being made to bring them back into the process? The minister wasn't even meeting with them. Can we ask as a committee directly to them, why is this the case?
I certainly think that I would be happy to suggest that as an action, and I would quite like to establish as well how many times, because I know, Peter, your questions were around who's still in the group. I'd like to understand how many times the group actually met with everybody at the table. From what I can ascertain, it may only be one occasion, which is not ideal in terms of a process where everybody was at the table. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, Chair. I mean, it's quite concerning because the organisations in question that withdrew from the task and finish group, as I said to the witnesses, are very reputable organisations. Some of them are the best in their field, and we regularly invite some of them to this committee to give expert evidence. And it just seems to me that the Minister thinks he knows better than these organisations. And, you know, it doesn't give us much hope that whatever guidance comes out of this is going to be robust and in the best interests of the child. I just want to put that on record.
Deputy Chair David, you want to come in?
Sure, I would just say we understand that these organisations have expertise in their field, but you know, I think sometimes members of the committee and members of the assembly at times are quite willing to outsource their views to some organisations or take briefing very easily from them. Their voices are to be listened to. It's the same whenever we have different youth organisations in. Voices are to be listened to in the round, but because they have a view, it does not follow that we must follow their particular view on things. And equally, if you're going to get involved in a task and finish group, you must do so with an open mind that where you might arrive at the end and what position, and it might not be your favourite position. I don't think necessarily the right response to that is to walk away. But.
Thank you, David, and Peter had indicated as well.
No, that's fine. I think there's something on the table of papers there in terms of how often that group met on your point, and it seemed to be, as you said, there was an initial meeting, then there was smaller meetings, and then they all convened together. So some of the stuff is there. I have no issue about writing and establishing how often. It looks like 5 times in various formats. Just on the issue regarding the other groups who left. I mean, it's first of all, it would be my view that it's not for the department to sort of coax them back. I mean, these are NICI and Children's Law Centre. They make these decisions on their own. Mm-hmm. They're credible organisations. They're big organisations. If they want to leave, well, they left. But it's not for the department to sort of coax them back. That would be my view. I'd prefer them to be there in the room making the case on behalf of young people in Northern Ireland, if that's what they're there to do. But they need to be in the room to do that. They may have their own reasons for leaving. It'd be my view that it's not a case of coaxing them back. If they wanted to come back, I think the department officials were really clear there. They'd be very welcome back, and I'd be surprised if they'd said anything else. They'd probably want them in the room. However, that's their decision to leave. As unfortunate as that is, in my view, but it's up to them.
They had really good reasons for it, but not responding to them since August. I do not think that's not very...
So in terms of an action, if we can just bring this to conclusion, there may be differences of opinion around the wider context of all this in terms of anything I've set out for ongoing correspondence. Are we all agreed on that in terms of establishing any of those points?
Just outline what that would be, Chair.
So we had issues around the EA protocol when an injury is sustained in a school in terms of what engagement is made with the both the school and the teacher impacted. Understanding clearly how many times the entire task and finish group met as a whole, and what if there was an opportunity to outline the rationale for not following up the departure of the groups that left in writing with them.
Refusing meetings.
We agreed. Okay, so that takes us to item 8 on the agenda, and that is a oral briefing from the Department of Education Bill team for the General Teaching Council Bill. So while the witnesses come through, I will bring members' attention to the materials in your pack. So we have a note from the clerk, page 399, a summary table at page 401. We have committee correspondence to DE scrutiny questions at page 435, Hansard of previous briefings at pages 446 to 468. And then we have proposed amendments to the Education Order 1998 that the GTC bill would initiate at page 486. And then the DE reply to the committee's questions is at page 21 of tabled papers. So there's a lot of material there, which I hope members have all studied in detail in advance of the session. So it's great to have you here, and appreciate you giving your time to committee, and I apologise for having kept you waiting. Unfortunately, you got the graveyard shift on this sessions, but we do appreciate you coming to committee. So I think at this stage I'll hand over for any initial remarks you want to make, but obviously we've got a very detailed response to which I want to acknowledge to a lot of questions which came through on the back of the examiner statutory rules evidence and the RAISE research report. So we do appreciate the detail that was gone into in that response. So it's really up to you how much of that you want to cover in oral evidence or how much you want to leave to question and answer, but I'll hand over to yourselves.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. And you'll be glad to hear we don't plan to cover all the detail, and I think members will welcome the brevity of my opening statement. So DE officials last gave evidence to the committee on the GTC bill on the 28th of January. And the following week you received briefings from the Assembly's Examiner for Statutory Rules and the Assembly's Research Service RAISE. The committee then 2 weeks ago sent the department a letter, as you said, which you asked officials to comment on some of the issues identified by the Examiner for Statutory Rules and each of the questions set out in RAISE's written report. The questions asked suggest that the committee broadly has the following concerns about the current bill. A concern, firstly, that the bill may confer wide-ranging regulatory making powers on the department and wide-ranging rule-making powers upon GTC-NI itself. There was also a concern that the bill does not sufficiently clarify governance, accountability and independence arrangements. And then thirdly, that the bill will impose increased financial and administrative burdens on teachers and the department without seeking to mitigate these. And we recognise the concerns that have been raised by the committee and the validity of what you do as part of your scrutiny in seeking greater specificity or detail and justification regarding each of the proposed changes. We also recognise that it's entirely appropriate that you seek further assurances from the department and that the regulatory, financial and governance mechanisms included in the bill will indeed ensure that the reformed GTC-NI is effective and sustainable, needs to be transparent in its decision making, accountable for its use of funding, and it has the confidence of the profession in the fairness and robustness of its disciplinary procedures. So in our response to your recent letter, we have endeavoured to respond to each of the 86 individual questions you've posed, and we're here today at the committee's request to provide any additional clarification and to add to those answers as required. Given the timescale the committee has set for concluding its scrutiny of the bill by the end of May, we have provided detailed answers, as you've referred to, Chair, and we hope that between those written answers and the answers provided today, many of your concerns can be conclusively addressed. In respect of areas where the committee has already asked to see further detail, we acknowledge the committee's desire to see the planned subordinate regulations supporting our bill. We had indicated in our last evidence session our hope that we'd be ready to share these with you by this stage. We can advise that the bill team have been very busy working closely with the officials from Departmental Solicitor's Office to progress the regulations. However, I would respectfully note that progress on these has been impacted by the need to prioritise the latest written response in the last 2 weeks. But through engagement with DSO in recent weeks, it has become clear that the drafting regulations is a technical and legally complex process. And given the gaps previously identified about the limited disciplinary powers provided to GTC in 2015, DSO are keen that we jointly carefully consider the phrasing of each proposed regulation. And DSO are rightfully insisting that the check that each provision and every rule-making power to be conferred on GTCNI can be clearly and unequivocally traced back to an appropriate existing legislative power or one of the new powers that are set out within the bill. So DSO's advice that we have received is that this work is likely to take at least another 2 months to complete, and in their opinion, the working draft of the regulations is not sufficiently robust to be shared at this stage. We have to respect this advice from DSO, but also in light of the committee's interest, because I know you have expressed an interest in seeing those regulations and the detail, we're now considering how else we might give members an understanding of the scope and the intended features of the regulations to fill in the gaps where the bill itself is silent. So subject to the preparation and ministerial clearance of a suitable briefing paper, we will aim to share this with the committee as soon as possible. That would help to fill in a lot more of that gap that you're concerned about in terms of what the regulations are intended to cover. So look, thank you for allowing me to make these opening remarks. I'm happy to take your questions at this time, and I'm just conscious, obviously I imagine you want to get into questions quickly because of the time and because of the detail of the responses that you've already received. So.
Thank you, Mark. Just on that point in the regs, just generally as a starter, just to make sure I've understood that, so the position is, and this is following DSO advice, that the committee, it's unlikely that there would be sight of draft regulations, but your intention is to put together a document that would give us a sense of the scope of those regulations and exactly what the areas they'd be covering. Have I understood that?
Yeah, I'll tease that out a wee bit for you, Chair. Engagement with, I mean, to be perfectly frank, this has taken far longer than we thought it would be. When we were here a month ago, or just over a month ago, we genuinely felt that it would be done within 3 or 4 weeks. That's what we anticipated. The level of detail and work that has been required, and to be fair to DSO, they've been engaging in great detail with us. So it's not that they've been negligent in not supporting us, because they have. The level of detail and the analysis that's required has taken far longer than anticipated. And they're recommending that we don't share, there's no point in sharing half a set of regs with the committee and wasting your time on each individual sentence when it's likely to change because it hasn't been developed far enough. So what we're planning to try and do is to develop a detailed paper which will actually explain the scope and the content of what we're intending to do through those regulations, and to start to address a lot of the issues that have been raised. A lot of them are around the disciplinary processes, but obviously there's the makeup of the council as well, or the board, and how that board would work. So we, subject to the Minister's approval, obviously we would want to get a detailed paper that would give you more information to reassure you what we're intending to do within the regulations, rather than expect you to carry on without any further information for a significant number of weeks. That's what we hope to be able to do.
Okay, other members may want to pick that up. I mean, I suppose it would be my understanding that getting sight of draft regulations isn't standard in every piece of legislation that comes through, but that you have rightly identified that members are concerned just with how wide-ranging these powers potentially are. So there was a keen interest in whether or not we would get sight of those. Could I check then on the regulations, just at clause 2 first of all then on that? And it's around just the scope of those powers to require or authorise the council to make provision by rules with respect to any matter as to which provision may be made by regulations. Your response that you provided to committee suggested that any rule-making powers that would be given to the council would be subject to assembly approval. Have I understood that correctly?
I'll defer to my colleagues here in terms of the detail. Alan, do you have to pick that up?
Yes, the intention is that while these regulations will be subject to negative resolution, is my understanding, we will be presenting them for the committee to scrutinise. There's no way we would wish to try and avoid that, because it is an iterative process. You have valid concerns. You've already shared some of those with us. We want to learn. We have now, as a team, invested nearly 5 years of effort in getting to this point, and we want an outcome which is as robust and productive, not just for GTCNI, but for the teachers, as we can possibly make it.
in the question that we'd asked under the clause 2 in particular, I think it was question 2 under clause 2, we'd asked whether it is intended that matters relating to the tenure and reappointment of council members would be delegated to council rules under the power in clause 2, bearing in mind that any such rules would not be subject to assembly procedure. So I suppose it's just trying to get that balance between, once you've delegated that power to GTC to set its own rules, that there's no scrutiny beyond that, so that's entirely over to GTC. Nobody gets a sight or a look at what they choose to do. That's entirely their business from that point on.
Well, GTC will have to operate obviously within the framework of the bill and the detail of the regulations. And I think as we've responded in question 2 there, the plan is that the tenure and reappointment of board members will be set out in the regulations. So the membership of the board, the term of office of a board member, the eligibility for reappointment and the appointment of the chairperson and the appointment of committees and subcommittees are at the regulations level.
Okay.
But there would be a level of detail below that in terms of perhaps, for example, the number of members they might need on particular committees or subcommittees, or that would be more at the GTC level. So those things that I've outlined there, the intention is to have those within the regulations themselves.
Okay. Just 2 other points. So one is around the issue which you didn't actually highlight as one of the concerns. I would probably just add it to the list. I mean, I do think that the question of whether the council should be subject to an elective process or an appointment process, I think is another issue in the mix. I suppose I wanted to get a sense to what extent the policy intent behind this bill is strongly wedded to the notion that this will be exclusively by public appointment, or is there any scope in terms of the ministers or the departments thinking around this, that perhaps the teaching members, which we've got a clear assurances there will be 6 of those on the council, could potentially be subject to an election process? Now, I asked that question clearly in the context, I have no interest in repeating the dysfunctional mistakes of the past with GTC. I'm not requiring persuasion that it was dysfunctional. It was. But there's also a balance around the confidence of the teaching profession. And I just wonder to what extent is that policy fixed, or if the committee was minded to look at an amendment in that space, for instance, would the department have any interest in looking at that as a shift in perhaps how this is framed?
Well, as you know, Chair, this regularly comes up, and every time we have spoken to the trade unions about it, which is on a number of occasions, this is their repeated appeal. And to be fair to them, they have not changed their position, that they believe it should be elected members. Likewise, I believe we haven't changed our position, and certainly it wouldn't be our intent to change the position. And I'm not saying that because we're being dogmatic. I'm saying that because the elected members, or some of the elected members, a small number of the elected members, were the problem that caused it the last time round. And I think it would be irresponsible of us to try and bring forward a bill that left it open to repeat the mistakes that happened 10 years earlier all over again. So we're really taking on one of the key recommendations from the BTMM review was that it should be through a public appointments process. And we genuinely do not believe that it dilutes the teaching representation. With the 50% guarantee of teachers on the board, it means they will have a more than adequate representation, but also they'll have the skills and the abilities to be able to perform as a board with the governance and the level of the requirements on board members, whereas history had shown it was very infighting and factional and very sort of parochial interests. So.
And this final question from me, and it's again I think in your responses to the committee's questions under clause 12, one aspect of that isn't particularly clear for me, and it is really, are we in a position where there is no intention to put any cost control measures in there at all around fee raising? So I'm not disputing, and I want to be clear, I'm happy to put this in my position out there crystal clear. I think teachers should pay for their professional registration and for their professional body, but I'm concerned that the current legislation that the bill is presented to us does lack cost control, and it allows the council to charge fees over and above the cost of running the council's functions. and I would just be concerned that there seems to be no provision around that, and would like some assurances around how you can.
I'll make a couple of comments, and colleagues may want to add to them. The intent in all of this is that the GTC would be able to set its own fees. You know, you've seen that in the response, but that is not a free for all, because there is the normal arm's length body control processes. So this will not be a profit making body. So the body itself will be accountable to the department. There are a whole series of controls in with every ALB in terms of the business plan that has to be submitted to the department, the financial oversight that the department has. There are 6 monthly reviews with the organisation to ensure and to give them the authority. They would only be able to, for example, dip into the reserves with the department's authority.
They could set their fee without the department's authority, if I have understood that correctly.
But that will all be subject to the overall financial control of the organisation by the department. So you couldn't have the GTC tripling or quadrupling the fee, building up massive reserves and having extra money that's not required, because the department would see that through its oversight and would not allow that to happen. I don't know if colleagues want to add to that.
If I could maybe just add something, and then certainly feel free to come in. I am not suggesting that the GTC is some sort of malign organisation that wants to amass huge reserves for personal gain or anything, or wants to exploit teachers, and not what I'm suggesting. I suppose it is just that sense of there had been reference to say, well, if there was a problem, a shortfall in the pension pot of the of the employees, or if we needed a big IT infrastructure, let's say needed to move premises, or huge maintenance projects, that you could see a massive hike potentially in fees 1 year that appears there's no control mechanism over. And I'm just wondering, was there nothing there to build in? The department should approve the fee rise being proposed, or some other mechanism that would give teachers some comfort in this space?
We've heard repeatedly from the unions the desire for GTCNI to be a wholly independent body.
I'm not here to speak for the unions. I'm asking a question about fees.
It's difficult to square that circle of demands for independence, and when we're offering greater independence, then that people suddenly seem to be very concerned about that.
I'm not asking this question at the behest of the unions.
Yes.
The first thing I noticed in this bill was clause 12. It allows fees to be raised. The
context is that there will be 6 teachers sitting on the board of the new GCC if the bill goes forward in its current form. They will have a vested interest and the interests of their colleagues to make sure that every penny that GTC spends is being spent wisely. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand the degree of fear that fees are going to run away, because they'll have very, very close insight into how the money collected is being spent, and that if a fee rise is proposed, the basis under which it's required to meet some new emerging pressure on the organisation. So it's not to say that that's not a legitimate concern, and we do understand why the unions do want us to have close regard to that, but I don't see a strong rationale where that would ever be a likely scenario.
Look, so I've understood your explanation on the fee control. Really, from the department's perspective, is the teaching representatives on the council are that check and balance.
But also, also the department's oversight. I mean, we know already, as in line with most ALBs, the department, or all ALBs, is involved on a regular review of looking at the business plan, their expenditure, how that is managed, and so there is a level of oversight around the financial governance of every ALB. Sorry, Leah.
No, thanks, Mark. I think probably what you're referring to in clause 12 is that exceeds the cost.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly the line that concerns me.
And it has been written that way to allow GTC the freedom to consider maybe 2 years, 3 years expenditure and figure any financial impact of those couple of years and even out a fee. It's not about changing the fee maybe every year, hiking it up and down as costs will consider. And then the second paragraph of that 1239A, they have to ensure that income taking 1 year with another, that they're covering. It's not that they can just charge
I see those two sections sort of balance each other out to an extent, but I suppose it is just that there's nothing formal around cost control. I suppose if I could maybe leave it with you if that's something the department could consider, but I appreciate understand the answers given. Deputy Chair, I'll bring you in.
Just two short questions. First of all, could you remind us how the teacher representatives will be appointed and by whom?
Well, the process is obviously a public appointments process that Capani will be involved in and a part of. So, half those teachers representatives will have to be registered teachers in the first place. So that'll be what identifies them as a teacher. But there will.
Do they apply?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes, there would be a public advertisement for membership, both teaching and non-teaching, and it would specify the person criteria of what it is that they need to be a part of that organisation or a part of that board, and it would follow a normal.
Have those criteria been drawn up yet?
No, not in detail. No, they haven't been. But they would follow normal sort of board level corporate governance and oversight criteria of what we would be looking for. But obviously, half of the members of the board would be registered teachers, and so would be representing directly the profession.
Okay, thanks for that. And sorry, were you going to come in there, Alan?
I was just going to come in and say this is essentially a very, very similar model to what they do in the Education Workforce Council in Wales, where they have 14 members, but their 7 are direct public appointments by the department. The other 7 are ministerial appointments as well from a group of nominating bodies who are invited to put forward members. But those 7 members must again be subject to ministerial appointment, and they must demonstrate that they also meet the same skills criteria as the 7 direct appointees. So we're not proposing anything that's wildly out of step with what's done elsewhere.
Okay, thanks for that. And just in terms of the regulations, and I know it's difficult to be precise about when those regulations might be finished, but have you got any sort of ballpark figure for that?
Well, the latest indications from DSO, they were suggesting they thought it would be about at least 2 months. So it's much longer than we had anticipated when we were here before, which is why we're proposing to try and get you further detail about the intent and the function of what we're trying to do in the regulations. I mentioned there, Chair, a number of things about membership of the board and the term of office, but what we want to do is provide a whole lot more detail for all the different areas that the regulations would cover, and particularly there's a lot of detail around the disciplinary processes and how that would be managed.
And you did say earlier that in terms of the committee getting sight of those regulations would be dependent on whether the Minister wanted to share them or not. Is that right?
Well, like anything that comes to the committee, it obviously is cleared through the Minister. That's normal process. But if the regulations are in a final stage from DSO, there's no reason why they would not be shared further. I'm just following the normal protocol where the Minister always approves everything that is passed through to the committee from the department.
Right, but there's no reason you can think of why the Minister wouldn't share them.
Well, I mean, the regulations are going to become a public thing eventually anyway. So
it's just we went through a process when the uniform legislation was going through that we were promised we would have sight of the guidelines, and then officials promised us that on a number of occasions. The guidelines are imminent, you'll have them next week, and so on and so forth. And then we didn't get them, and the Minister then in the chamber told us we were never going to get them until the legislation had been passed. So I'm just interested in how the issue of the regulations will be dealt with. I know it's not exactly the same, but
I obviously can't comment on the school uniform bill because I wasn't involved in that at all. But we are genuinely surprised. When we were here a month ago, the plan was to have them to you by now. It is that the thing that is holding it up is nothing to do with the Minister. It is the detail of having to work through with DSO. And there was far more linkage, as I said, between the existing legislation and the proposed new powers to make sure every element of the regulations is correctly linked. So that's absolutely the only thing that is holding this up.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. John?
Yes, thank you for that. In terms of the disciplinary hearing, if we get the disciplinary hearing for teachers, will the chair of that be legally qualified?
has been thought about, I think, hasn't it, Alan? So
at the minute, the thinking has progressed, and GTC and I have developed some flowcharts and detailed thoughts on processes. At the moment, they're thinking that the panel would be a 3-person panel with at least one lay person, at least one teacher representative, and possibly the third person being a legal advisor, or possibly a third person plus access to legal support. GTC haven't gone to that level of detail that you're asking about yet in their thinking. In part, they will want, once they have an idea of what will be workable processes, to test those and consult with the profession.
When was the last time you came here?
28th of January.
28th of January, yeah.
I asked the same question. I mean, it was one of the first things I asked. What does the panel look like? In my view, it should be chaired by someone legally qualified, then a lay person, then a teacher representative. That reflects best practice within disciplinary regimes. They then also have access to a legal advisor. But I mean, we're well down the line and that hasn't been fleshed out.
I think with respect, I mean, there are the 3 layers. There's the bill, the regulations, and GTC NI's processes. You know, all of the detail has not been fleshed out of the processes. If your concern is that there needs to be legal advice and legal support a part of that disciplinary committee, that's entirely the intention. Whether it's actually a legal chair or whether they have access to legal advice, I totally agree with you that will be required, but we haven't worked out the detail of that yet.
Well, it's important detail. It's a fundamental tenet of whether a disciplinary body that has the power to dismiss someone from their profession under misconduct in a misconduct regime should be legally qualified. To me, that's a fundamental. I mean, I raised that the first time we discussed this in the House. First time I raised it here, but we don't know the answer. How are we going to, when it says, often regimes now disaggregate performance and ethics. So you'll have, if it's something to do with integrity, bad conduct, it's dealt with in one set of regulations. If it's then competence, it's dealt with in another, because you want to deal with them in 2 different ways. Someone who does X that's really unethical, that's a disciplinary matter. Someone who does incompetence, you want to keep trying to see if we can develop them, improve it until the point that you can't do that, then you exit them out. It seems to me you've put both in the same regime. I'll just flag that as a risk. But second of all, it says here, someone who's been guilty of unacceptable professional conduct. Is there any definition of that? What is unacceptable professional conduct?
I think in part that needs, again, and this is not an excuse, that would need the profession in consultation with GTC and I to define a code of conduct and practice. And it would be for the profession to define what constituted unacceptable professional conduct or serious levels of professional incompetence. We as policy officials would not be remotely qualified to make those judgments.
No, but I mean, you could have a statutory definition at the outset, which you've seen in other regimes. This seems to me a tad under thought. I mean, I'm getting a lot of, this is legislation, is it not? It's a bill. And I'm getting I haven't thought that, that's detail. I mean, these are serious issues. These are teachers' professional futures, as well as the complainant, who could be a child who's been abused, for example. So this is serious stuff.
We're not arguing at all with that, John, and it is serious stuff. But what we've also, and you're asking us to do, is ensure we bring the profession with us. And if we just try and define everything as policy people who are not teachers down to the nth degree, that's not bringing the profession with us. So what we want to do is that the bill and the regulation cover all the core powers and the very high level elements of what's required, but a lot of the detail of the processes underneath and the minutiae will require discussion and consultation with the profession to make sure it's what is required by them.
I need to be satisfied as I scrutinise this. Final point is this: a lot of misconduct regimes suffer from disproportionality, so low-level things that should be dealt with at a local level within the school are then bureaucratised, and stress goes on teachers, and we have these drawn-out procedures. What steps are in place to make sure this remains a proportionate regime that only deals with this upper-end potential?
Well, I guess that comes to your earlier point about how do we define the professional conduct or professional misconduct. You're absolutely right. The intent with this must be that GTCNI will only become involved in the most serious of cases. So there are ones that have gone through.
Where does it say that? Just point me to the line.
But not everything's in the bill, John. It's not all in the bill. The bill gives a framework, and the regulations will have a lot of detail around disciplinary procedures, which I accept that you have not seen yet. But if we can get a paper that describes the intent of what we want to do through the regulations, you will see that there's a lot of information around the disciplinary areas that you're asking about. So I agree with the thrust and the reason for all the questions that you're asking. But we want to get a process that the profession agrees with, but the protections at a high level are in the bill and the regulations, but the detail of how that's delivered is a lot of the question areas
that just asked aren't in the bill or the regulations. The protections that it's a legally qualified chair who can find you guilty of a serious professional offence, the need to keep this proportionate, the dangers of conflating really bad conduct, which means you should never serve in a school again, is a totally different thing to say you're incompetent, because actually you might come back 5 years later when you're a bit older and you actually now are developed into someone who can be a teacher. These are fundamentals that I think should be right through the bill, like the letter through a stick of rock. I've expressed concerns about this from the outset. I think there are experts in disciplinary regimes out there, there are barristers and things. They could help with this, because I used to do this stuff for a living, and honestly, there are big errors here in how you've set out with the basic framework.
I'll give Mark opportunity just to respond to that, and then again we can in our closed session considerations at a future event we can pick up on whether that's an area John's interested in terms of
No, I think I can understand your questions, John, but you haven't seen the regulations, obviously, and that's part of the problem here, a major part of the problem. If we can provide you with more detail around what the intent is around the regulations, I hope that would bring reassurance. But we will take on board. There's nothing that you have said that I think is irrelevant or not important. They're all very important in this. It's the timing of when those are prescribed in absolute detail. But if we can get more detail to you in terms of what the intention of the regs is, I hope that will help. And then obviously we'll have a more fulsome discussion at that point.
And I just ask scrutiny questions. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm against the
I understand.
direction.
Yep.
It's just so I do the all witnesses.
That's your job.
Thanks. Thank you.
John. No other indications. So I did just want to ask one other question, and I'm really briefly, and it's just around the Schedule 1A in the bill that's associated with Clause 11, and it's just again around the regulation making powers, because it's framed as regulations may make provision in connection with, and then it lists some really detailed, quite specific things in terms of the powers, disciplinary powers and investigatory powers. Given that we're not going to see get sight of the regulations, that material you're going to provide us with in terms of the general sort of thrust and direction of travel of those regulations, will that clarify whether it's everything that's in Schedule 1A is going to be included? Because it's quite broad. You may make provisions that reflect Schedule 1A or you may not. So it's just to what extent can we sort of rely on Schedule 1A as this is what it's going to look like in terms of disciplinary powers, or will it be something different?
Alan, are you able to pick that up in terms of the detail that will be provided in the paper, hopefully?
We have, I can reassure the committee that in preparing the current draft regulations and discussing them with DSO, we have already put in a raft of detail below Schedule 1A, detailing, for example, notification periods for teachers to be notified of accusations against them and the commencement of proceedings, how and when they would be notified of a hearing and what their rights to appear, to be represented at that, to make written submissions. A lot of that detail has already been thought of and will feature in the regs.
Can we be assured that what's in Schedule 1A is a bare minimum that will definitely be in the regulations? It'll not be less than that?
Yes.
So that everything that's in Schedule 1A will be reflected in the regs. It's just because it says it may make provision along these lines, and it's sort of it just raised the question: why is it in there if you may do it or you may not? Because you've been so specific in Schedule 1A.
Our use of terminology such as may has again been on the advice of OLC and our legislative draftsperson, which is that you don't paint yourself into a corner. When it becomes a matter of settled law, any change is very difficult. So you draft slightly broader enabling powers so that you can revisit with a minimum of pain. or you can develop the thinking and bring forward revised regulations downstream without having to
understand that. I
revisit
suppose
the
it's
bill.
just maybe I am misunderstanding. It seems on the one hand you've been quite broad. We may do this, and then you proceed to be really, really prescriptive. It's just about, I mean, if you wanted to keep it open, you didn't need to put any of that in. You could just say you may make regulations around disciplinary powers. It seems that it's just, I'm looking for an assurance that we can rely that what's in Schedule 1A will be in the regs.
I think
it will. So that's clear. But there could be more in addition to that. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Any other questions from any other members on this? No. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you. No doubt we'll be in contact.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think to bring that session to a conclusion, my understanding in terms of next steps, and it was really under the from the previous session we had with the examiner statutory rules, that based on what we've heard today and the responses we've had from the department, we would be looking to bring the examiner back in to provide further evidence to committee. There is raised material also still to come through, and that's the comparative exercise around how different regulators operate in other jurisdictions. And unless members have anything else that they're keen to hear from, I would suggest that after that we may want to move into and I think we sort of dipped our toe in the water with it last week and the conversation didn't really go anywhere, but a closed session discussion around really getting clarity from members if there are clauses of concern, if there are amendments that that anybody has an interest in taking forward on a committee basis. And then at that stage we would be moving into the more formal end of looking at this clause by clause, Danny.
Just a wee question just around the regs. Are saying hopefully it will be 2 months. I'm just thinking about the timetable and all this here. I'm guessing we're going to be stuck within committee until we get a look at the regs.
Well, I think they were clear we're not going to see the regs. It'll be a summary of what the regs will cover. Is what we're being.
But that's still 2 months away. If I picked that up right.
I understood that they hope to bring that sooner. I would have thought that the summary rather
the summary will come earlier.
The summary will come.
The regs will be ready in 2 months, but that comes right up against the end of committee stage. So the committee stage ends on the 27th of May.
Does it have to end on the 27th?
You can't extend a committee stage a second time, so the committee has already can't.
No. So that's fixed.
Convenient, that isn't it?
I think it applies to everybody, Danny. To be fair, no matter what committee you're on.
So a month and then it's 2 months in the session.
Gerrymander.
Don't start on John. Don't start him.
This hasn't changed at all.
No, Chair, come on.
Remind members I would just remind members we are an open session.
We are.
Thank you. So if I could just check through the clerk, other than what I've suggested in terms of that scheduling of the evidence we now need to hear, is there anything else that we need to be considering in terms of evidence on this bill?
No, I mean, I think that there is a lot of material in the correspondence the officials brought. So before we have that closed session discussion, like members will want to go through that clause by clause and just see, does it align with what they've heard from stakeholders, and is there anything that they would want to propose as an amendment. I think the chair has asked the witnesses just now about, issues of independence and fees and things, and whether the department has a will to amend those. And it doesn't appear that the department does, so that means that it's over to the committee to consider whether they wish to commission their own amendments from the bill office.
Yeah, I think in the process under the school uniforms bill, there was I'll bring in a wee sec, Peter. There was you indicated there was a sort of a suggestion, sort of maybe running under the surface, that the committee hadn't engaged, openly enough with the department around amendments. But so I think if there is any opportunity for the department to go away and amend the bill, if there is interest in it, I think it's always the ideal that's the process rather than the committee taking it forward. But I have to say I didn't get a sense that there was much appetite there on those two issues, but there may be other issues that members have an interest in, but that is all appropriately dealt with in closed session. So Peter, you'd want to
just briefly, Chair. I mean, look, I sort of concur with what you've said there. I think it's always preferable if there's a view that a clause should be amended, that the department goes away and sort of does that. The department, be it this department or any other department, any other committee, might have a view that actually there's a good reason for the clause as drafted, in which case I'll probably say, well, actually, no, we actually think that it's this, and the context was given there were certainly in the last bit of discussion I think Mark sort of said, well, look, this will come under, I think it was to John, this will come in the regs. It's not appropriate for this to be in primary legislation. I happen to agree with him. I know you were testing John where he was at. That is for the regs in terms of how that process works out. In the wider point, Chair, it'll be up to the committee as to what it wants to do regarding committee amendments. But I think we want to be pretty clear with the department first in terms of going to them and saying, look, actually, this is what the committee thinks. What do you think? And they will come back with an answer, and then you take it from there.
I would agree, Peter, and I think we haven't really formed a settled view. I don't think in
no,
on this.
I understand that.
I don't think anybody's really declared any strong intentions around any of this. So, but we will again all appropriately dealt with in closed session. So, John, in terms of just next steps,
there's very clear guidance out there because professional disciplinary regimes they all follow the same case law. So there's specialists in them who, when you read the case law in any given case or appeal, so for example, my job in the PSNI, we would have been reviewing case law that was the General Medical Council or a teaching body, because professional discipline is all case law relevant to the different professions. And generally what they do is at the very outset of the bill, you will say, this is for gross misconduct. This is for the very serious misconduct that requires someone to be suspended or dismissed. And then you leave schools to deal with the low-level conduct issues, because they're then quickly and proportionally dealt with. Look, you can't do that, X, Y, and Z. And you need to demarcate the two. And I also have concerns when you don't distinguish between unethical behaviour and what's generally referred to in the performance is performance. One's about competence, one's about integrity. And usually the criminal offences sit on that side, unprofessional, behaviour, language, treatment of exploitation of your position. That is all under dishonesty, all under integrity, and it's managed in a very different way than performance. Because performance, as soon as underperformance is identified, you start a procedure where you're trying to intervene, action plans, informal action plans, then you're put on performance notices. So I think the bill needs to separate, in my view, gross misconduct, the serious stuff, from the low-level stuff that will stay within schools, boards of governors, so it's quick. Because if you don't, and you start allowing too much to go into the GTC stuff, it will jam up. And the minute the teachers think they're at risk of losing their jobs, they all get lawyered up. It costs everybody a fortune, and there's a huge delay, and you've got to separate the two.
John, could I ask, just in terms of the language of Schedule 1A, it does frame it in terms of these powers will exist in cases of unacceptable professional conduct or serious professional incompetence. Do you think that's not clear enough? Would that be it's not clear enough?
Unacceptable. So if I use language in here that, say in a school someone used unacceptable language, that's any language that's not acceptable. Or any conduct that's not acceptable, but clearly not any conduct that's below acceptable, you would be dismissed for. So you've got to demarcate between grossly unacceptable, which is worthy of potentially being dismissed, and something that can just be dealt with. Because unacceptable is everything, but there's two tiers of unacceptable. And in almost all professions, you distinguish between gross and then normal, not gross misconduct, and that's stuff the Board of Governors can deal with quickly. And that has to be separated.
And I checked just through the clerk, is that something that we would anticipate the RAISE paper would deal with in terms of comparing how other jurisdictions define, make those distinctions? I mean, I appreciate they are under pressure in terms of what they're being asked to
they have reached out to the regulators in the other jurisdictions just to ask certain system clarifications, but I'm not sure that disciplinary processes were one of those. I can ask them to on the basis of what you've asked. You did ask these questions before, John.
From day one.
Yeah.
It's really getting to as well how much of that should be on the face of the bill or be dealt with by regulations. It'd be good to get a sense of what other jurisdictions do. Okay. Well, don't think there's anything else at this stage. So next action would be scheduling then a briefing with the examiner of statutory rules, and we'll take that forward. Hopefully we can get that in place fairly soon. Okay, next item on the agenda, and I appreciate that it has been a lengthy meeting, and just to clarify, it was in relation to the availability of the departmental bill team to present to us, and we are time bound with our committee stage, so it was important to get them in. So item 9 on the agenda there is correspondence. So I would just draw members' attention to pages 505 to 548, and where we have items provided under correspondence. We have a couple of additional items in tabled papers. We have a summary note, page 505 of tabled papers, and as usual I'll just refer to the items that require discussion or decision. Item 9.2 on page 506, it's correspondence from an individual who has responded to the committee's consultation on special educational needs SEN Regulations 26. Are we content that we add those papers for our consideration of the SL1? Are we agreed?
Right.
Item 9.3, page 524. It's correspondence from an individual asking if there are plans to update air quality guidance based on England's updated guidance, which was recently published. Are we content to write to the Minister and ask if he has any thoughts or consideration around implementing similar guidance?
Great.
Agreed. Item 9.4, page 525, it's correspondence providing the Finance Minister's oral statement on the Chancellor's spring forecast. Are we content to note? Agreed. Item 9.5, page 532, correspondence from an individual regarding strategically important small schools. And we just note that's a principal who has presented to the committee in an informal briefing before, raising similar issues. So just to seek members' views, I would note that the 5-year budget sustainability plan, which I think has prompted this correspondence, is out for consultation at the moment. So I would be suggesting that we share that correspondence with the department and with the Minister, and we can certainly ask at this stage, if committee's agreed, if he will be considering introducing this concept into the area planning and the Area Planning Commission going forward. But I think as these plans are really at quite an early stage, there might not be a huge amount they can come back with. But I don't know if members have any other suggested actions in regard to that. We agreed? Agreed. Okay, item 9.6, it's correspondence from the Youth Work Alliance, and it sets out some questions specifically that they want to be raised with the Minister in relation to youth work funding and policy. I'm going to propose that we note that, and as we have our evidence session next week, to Minister and members can take those issues up should they choose with the witnesses, if we're agreed. Item 9.7, page 546, it's an invitation from the Northern Ireland Survivor Councillor to an Expert Insights event. Can I propose we note for diaries? Agreed. Item 9.8, page 548, it's correspondence from the Justice Committee on the Criminal Justice Inspectorate for Northern Ireland report into child criminal exploitation in Northern Ireland, and I would propose we note. Members are agreed. Item 9.9, these are just the 2 additional items in tabled papers. Correspondence from the Minister on 3 issues that the committee had raised: academic selection and work ongoing in the department to look at that from a policy perspective, the introduction of the Controlled Schools Management Unit, particularly questions raised by the Deputy Chair around the evidence base, and an update on the curriculum-led capital investment fund, specifically around sports pitches. There's a lot in the correspondence. I think on the academic selection issue, it appears that the Minister is clear there is no work ongoing in the department and there's no intention to. I'm not sure what's to be gained by writing to him again on it. Again, on the Controlled Schools Management Unit, I think the position's set out, and again, I don't think we're going to get any more unless the Deputy Chair has a different view. And the curriculum-led capital investment is an update. So on that basis, I would propose to note, but as these are issues that have had considerable discussion, do just want to give members the opportunity to raise any other actions. No, agreed. Item 9.10 is an invite to attend a virtual tour of an inclusive school in California. This is on the back of our informal briefing with Professor Victoria Graff. It's on the 22nd of April, our time 5 p.m. So there's an incentive to finish committee on that day in good time. And I don't know if there's scope to use the facilities here for that briefing if members are interested, but I think it would require members to definitely indicate they want to join that session. I know I'm certainly interested. Would be good to get attendance from members, and she specifically asked if there are questions that we would like the tour and the briefing to address, that we raise those. So I'd suggest those go through the clerk so that they can be, any Northern Ireland specific queries can be highlighted. David, you wanted to speak to that?
Oh, no, it was just, I'm interested.
You're interested? No, I absolutely am interested. Yeah, I would really be keen to see it. Short of a trip to California, yes. We'll do it virtually, so that's fine. Okay. Any other views, Member John?
Sorry, I thought it was any other business.
No, I mean I've closed correspondence off if we're all agreed.
Propose the trip to California.
We're not proposing a trip to California, to be clear. Happy to close item 9 then. There's no further items to consider. We'll quickly do forward work programme, and then I'll bring bring you in on item 11. Item 10, forward work programme. There's a draft forward work programme there for your reference at page 631. I would just highlight that we are retaining plenty of slack there, and I wouldn't propose we do anything other than that, as the legislative programme is fairly substantial from here on in. So are we content to endorse that programme?
Chair.
Oh, Peter has got a...
Yep, no, just a question. If I can get my forward work programme up. I know I'm very new to the committee. It's in my second week. So on the 6th of May, we have under stakeholder Rebecca Loader and Professor James Nelson. It just says RE.
Yes.
What is that? And give me some context.
So that is the research that Queen's University published in relation to public engagement around issues in relation to the RE curriculum and delivery of RE in Northern Ireland. It was quite wide-ranging research and public survey work and focus group work that they did across a range of different groups interested in that, and wider public surveying. And there was interest in the committee to hear in relation to that research.
Okay. I had a look at this one, and
you did know what it was in relation to, then?
Never ask a question, Chair, as you know that you don't know the answer to. Obviously, it's more or less as you mentioned, pulling in educators from a diverse group, including Muslim, Jewish, Baha'i, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, humanist, atheist, and so forth. Interestingly, it also included principals and RE coordinators from controlled, maintained, and integrated schools. Will be it for me to suggest that the Gaelic, the Irish medium schools, I would have thought should have been on that list and were left out. And I don't know why, but they were. I'm just conscious of the fact that
perhaps Peter, questions to be raised with them when they come to give evidence.
I'm sure Pat's probably got that one ready now. There's a free one for you, Pat, if they do come.
I'm just glad to see there's a new champion for the Irish medium sector.
As you know, I'm fair to everybody, Pat, and I thought that was an interesting admission. I suppose my only point on this, Chair, is that obviously we have, as maybe these people could send us a written report on it. I'm conscious of the work we have. I'm also conscious that, as far as I'm aware, there is a review ongoing. I'm pretty sure Noel Purdy, who's coming next week, is probably chairing that in terms of looking at the RE syllabus.
He's not probably chairing it, he's definitely chairing
it. Yeah, he's definitely chairing it. I knew that too. I knew that one as well. So I'm just wondering, in terms of a session, and in light of the concerns that Danny just raised in terms of time and scope, I'm thinking, because... There's my youngest son phoning me. Maybe he has a question on this as well. He wants to try and get in. I'm just wondering, is it still the committee's view that is a good use of a session, given the obvious time pressures we have, and whether or not we would be better getting a written briefing on that instead? Considering that there's also the fact that there's an ongoing consultation on this, and there's work being done in terms of trying to review this.
Anyone would think it wasn't 20 to 6 on a Wednesday, given how long that preamble was. But yeah,
Zach's phoning me to tell me that. He's phoning to say, "Daddy, when are you home?" That's what he's doing.
Over to committee in terms of the question. I'm happy to put my view out there. I think this is a policy area we haven't really looked at, and I think that this briefing, I attended the launch of this research, and it was really, really interesting, and it is genuinely a really broad-ranging group, including views across a range of different Christian perspectives. So I think it would help inform the committee's thinking. We are interested in curriculum development, and there's no reason I don't see to pull the briefing, but for committee members to set out, not my call.
I'll not prejudge what I'm going to say. My only thing is, if we're going to go sort of looking at this, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be looking into it, balance in terms of whether we're going to hear from a number of voices around. I will prejudge what's going to come. I don't know, but Peter's more informed on this than I am, but...
Any other views on that? I've no interest in withdrawing. It was agreed unanimously by committee when proposed, so
I might be we should go ahead with that.
I don't think it'd be a good look to invite someone and then not invite them. So
it seems no strong reason to do so, and it's very much a live issue in terms of there is a curriculum, a syllabus review happening right now on this issue. So I wouldn't be supporting doing anything differently. Peter, any alternative?
Nope, that's fine. I'm just flagging it up given the context of the committee and what we've talked about today. Chair, that's fine.
That's fine. So that takes us then to if members are content to endorse the forward work programme as drafted. Are we agreed? Item 11. Any other business? John, you had an item.
Chair, some teachers or retired teachers be getting letters to the post the last couple of days saying that they owe substantial amount of money back to the teacher pension authority. Some of my constituents up to £4,000. So it's come as a bit of a shock. I think it's something to do with what's called the MacLeod judgment that happened some years ago in England, but it would just be good to get some kind of sense from the department what this is all about, because it sort of came blind to me and I presume everyone else.
Can't we write to the department to get clarity on the context of that correspondence? Yep. Okay. We agreed.
Great.
That's grand. Item 12 then is date, time and place of next meeting, and that's scheduled for Wednesday the 18th of March, 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And I'll just put the question on that basis that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Committee room 29. Sound. 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 Committee